Some people walk out of your life without a single word, and some people, no matter how much they lose, no matter how many years pass, cannot forget you, no matter how hard they try. Jang Min-jun, the most feared mafia boss in East Asia, a man who made all of Seoul tremble with a single phone call, now confined to a wheelchair after a collision that should have killed him. Dr. Nyla Brooks, the only woman who ever made him feel human. The same woman he believed had abandoned him 13 years ago. She is now his rehabilitation doctor, and his first words to her are not relief, not joy. They are an accusation that cuts straight to the bone. You broke your promise. If you're watching this story, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and follow so you never miss what happens next. Let's see how far this story travels. The file was unremarkable at first glance. Nyla Brooks almost missed it entirely. She was halfway through her third coffee of the morning, sitting behind a desk that had accumulated 6 months of organized chaos. Color-tabbed folders, printed discharge summaries, 2 half-eaten protein bars she kept forgetting to throw away. The rehabilitation ward at Seohan Medical Center occupied the 14th floor of the building, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her desk, the Han River was a flat gray ribbon under a sky that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to rain. She reached for the next intake folder without looking up. Then she read the name. Jang Min-jun. Her hand stopped moving. The coffee cup stayed suspended halfway to her mouth for a full 3 seconds before she set it down. Carefully. The way you set something down when your hands have suddenly stopped being reliable. She read the name again. Because names were common. Because Korea had millions of people and coincidences existed, and she was a 34-year-old woman who had spent the last decade building a career on discipline and rational thought, and she was not the kind of person who fell apart over a name printed on a medical intake form. Except her heart was doing something she hadn't felt in 13 years. She opened the folder. Male. 35 years old. Admitted 6 weeks prior, following a high-impact vehicle collision on the Gangnam Expressway. Spinal contusion at the T6 vertebra. Partial paralysis of the lower extremities. Surgical intervention successful. Patient transferred to rehabilitation services for long-term mobility recovery. No listed employer. The occupation field had been left blank, which in Nyla's experience meant either the patient was unemployed or the patient's occupation was the kind that didn't get written down in hospitals. The emergency contact listed a name she didn't recognize. Below it, a single handwritten note from the admitting physician, circled twice in red ink. Patient requires specialist-level rehabilitation, high priority. Assigned to Dr. Brooks per department head instruction. Nyla sat back in her chair. She thought about the last time she had seen Jang Min-jun. She had been 17 years old and standing in the rain outside Hansung Preparatory Academy with a backpack over one shoulder and a one-way plane ticket in her mother's purse. He had been 16, standing 10 feet away, watching her with that expression he always had, the one that gave nothing away except to people who had learned to read the tension around his eyes. She had tried to explain. She remembered the words jamming up in her throat, the rain hitting the pavement so hard it bounced, her mother pulling at her arm. She remembered his face going very still in that particular way that meant he was deciding something. She had gotten on the plane, and she had spent 13 years trying not to think about what that stillness had meant. Nyla closed the folder and pressed both palms flat against her desk. The river outside was starting to disappear behind a curtain of low cloud. Her office felt smaller than it had 5 minutes ago. She picked up her phone and called the nursing station. "The Jang Min-jun intake," she said when the charge nurse picked up. "What time is his first session?" 2 o'clock, Dr. Brooks. He's already in the building. His security team arrived about 20 minutes ago. His security team? Yes. 4 of them. They're in the waiting area. They've been very... A pause. Quiet. Nyla thanked her and hung up. She had 2 hours. She used them to review every page of his medical file 3 times, to check the imaging reports, to map out a preliminary rehabilitation framework, and to convince herself that this was a professional situation that she was fully equipped to handle. She had treated difficult patients before. Powerful patients. Men who thought their money or their status entitled them to override clinical judgment. She knew how to manage that. What she had less experience managing was the specific weight of 13 years of unanswered silence sitting in the chair across from her desk. At 1:58, she heard the wheels. Not the soft rubber roll of a standard hospital wheelchair. Something heavier, custom built, from the sound of it. The kind of equipment that got ordered when cost was not a consideration. She was already standing when her office door opened. Two men entered first, broad-shouldered, dark suits, eyes that moved around the room in the practiced sweep of people who spent their lives looking for exits and threats. They checked the corners. They checked the window. One of them looked at her with an expression that was professional and impersonal, and somehow still managed to communicate that he had assessed her and found her non-threatening, which she found both reassuring and faintly insulting. Then Minjun came through the door. Nyla had thought she was prepared. She had spent 2 hours preparing. She was not prepared. I was bigger than she remembered, though that wasn't entirely fair. She was comparing a 35-year-old man to the 16-year-old boy she had last seen in the rain, and human beings tended to change significantly in the intervening years. The sharp, watchful quality he had always carried was still there, but it had settled differently. Less like a boy learning how to hold himself. More like a man who had long since stopped questioning whether the room belonged to him. His jaw was harder. His shoulders were the kind that came from actual physical consequence, not a gym. There was a scar along the left side of his jaw that she didn't remember, thin and pale, maybe 2 inches long. His hair was cut close. He was wearing a dark sweater and dark trousers, and the wheelchair he occupied looked exactly as expensive as it sounded. Matte black frame, precision engineering, the kind of equipment that costs more than most people's cars. He rolled to a stop in the middle of her office. His eyes found her immediately and didn't move. 13 years, she had been 17. She had cried on 4 different planes and written him letters from 3 different countries, and called a number that rang and never connected. She had told herself eventually that silence was its own kind of answer, that she had to let go, that whatever they had been to each other had been a specific thing that belonged to a specific time, and that time was over. She had mostly believed that. Mostly. Dr. Brooks, one of the security men said. Mr. Zhang. Neither of them acknowledged him. Mingun looked at her the way she remembered him looking at everything that mattered to him. Completely. Without the social performance of looking away. His expression had always been difficult to read, and it was still difficult to read. But she could see something moving behind it, something that had weight. She opened her mouth to introduce herself professionally, to set the tone, to establish that this was a clinical environment, and she was his physician, and whatever history existed between them was exactly that. History. He spoke first. First, you broke your promise. 4 words. Flat delivery. No heat in it, which was somehow worse than if there had been. The room was very quiet. The security men were looking at the walls. Outside, the cloud had finished swallowing the river. Nyla felt the years collapse. Minjun, I'm not interested in the explanation, he said. His Korean was the same. She had always been fluent, but she had spent so many years in the States that Korean now lived slightly to the left of her instincts, requiring a half-second transit that she was usually good at hiding. Right now, she wasn't hiding it. I'm here because my doctors transferred my case to this facility and your name is on my file. I don't have a preference about therapists. You can assign someone else. I'm the department head, she said. All high-priority cases come to me. Then I'll find another facility. The next comparable program is in Busan. She kept her voice steady. Clinical. She was very good at clinical. 6-hour round trip for every session. Given your current mobility constraints, that's inadvisable. Something moved across his face. Not softening. Minjun had never softened, not even at 16. But a recalculation. The way he used to look when someone presented him with a chess problem that required him to revise his assumptions about the board. How long is the program? He said. Minimum 12 weeks. Likely closer to 18, given the extent of the spinal involvement. She moved to the desk and picked up the preliminary framework she'd built that morning, because having something in her hands helped. We'll do a full assessment today. I need to understand your current range of motion, your pain levels, and your goals for recovery. My goal is to walk. That's a destination. I need to understand your timeline expectations, your pain threshold, your willingness to comply with a program that will be uncomfortable most days and painful on the worst ones. I've had worse. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure she wanted to think too hard about what that meant. Sit down, he said. Not a request. Not exactly a command. Something in between, the way he used to talk in school when he was trying not to sound like he was giving orders and failing at it. You're standing like you're getting ready to run. I'm standing because I haven't finished my intake assessment. Nyla, her name in his mouth. She had forgotten the specific way he said it, the slight flattening of the first syllable, the precision of the second. He had learned English partly from American movies and partly from her, and her name had always sounded different when he said it, more deliberate, like it meant something. She sat down. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. One of the security men shifted his weight, and Min Jun made a gesture with two fingers, small, almost imperceptible. And both men stepped out of the office and pulled the door mostly closed behind them, leaving a 4-inch gap. 13 years, Min Jun said. Yes. No contact. That's not... She stopped, pressed her thumbnail against the edge of the folder in her hands. That's not accurate. His expression didn't change. I never heard from you. I know you didn't. She looked at him directly, because she had always been the kind of person who looked at hard things directly. It was one of the things he used to say he respected about her, back when they were teenagers and respect between them was currency freely traded. I'm telling you that the absence of contact was not for lack of trying. Silence. You disappeared, he said. 1 week you were there, the next week you weren't. No warning, no explanation. Your desk and homeroom was empty for 3 days before anyone told me your family had left the country. She felt that land the way it had always landed, like a stone dropped into still water, the rings spreading out before she could stop them. She had been 17. She had been terrified. She had been receiving her 3rd round of chemotherapy in a Baltimore hospital when she thought about his face and that empty desk and what it must have looked like from where he was standing. I was sick, she said. A pause. Sick, he repeated. Leukemia, acute lymphoblastic. My mother found out 2 weeks before we left Seoul. She had a specialist in the U.S., her cousin's husband, who agreed to take my case. We had 72 hours to leave. She kept her voice even. She had told this story before. It got easier with repetition, which she had once thought was a form of healing and later decided was simply the scar tissue of time. I wrote you letters. From Baltimore, from the treatment center in Maryland, from my grandmother's house in Atlanta. I called the number you gave me, multiple times. I was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully decode. Nothing reached you, she said. It wasn't a question anymore. She had suspected for years. I know, I figured that out eventually. She paused. Someone made sure of it. The quality of Minjun's stillness shifted. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But Nyla had spent significant time in her adolescence learning to read the micro-expressions of a boy who had been raised in an environment where showing feeling was a liability, and she caught it. The slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible set of his jaw. What do you mean? He said quietly. Someone made sure of it. I don't know who yet, but the letters were sent, the calls were made. The fact that none of them reached you. She paused again, choosing her words. That doesn't happen by accident. The room held the weight of that for a moment. Then Minjun said, We'll talk about that later. And the way he said it told her it was not a dismissal. It was the opposite, a thing being carefully set aside so it could be properly examined. She recognized the behavior. He had always been methodical. It was one of the things that had made him terrifying at 16, when most boys his age were all reaction and no thought. Right now you have an assessment to conduct. She pulled out the intake questionnaire. Her handwriting was steady. She was proud of that. On a scale of 1 to 10, she said, describe your average daily pain level. 6. And on your worst days? A beat. 8. Do you wake up with pain or does it build throughout the day? Both. She wrote it down, kept her face neutral. A 6 to 8 daily pain range for spinal contusion 6 weeks post-surgery was within expected parameters, but it was also the kind of number that meant every rehabilitation session was going to cost him something real. And she already knew, from 20 minutes in this room, that Minjun was not going to admit when it was costing him too much. That was not a clinical observation. That was 13 years of knowing the specific architecture of his stubbornness. Have you attempted standing since the surgery? Twice. Results? His jaw shifted. Unsuccessful. She looked up from the questionnaire. He was looking at the window. The muscle along his jaw was doing something controlled and precise, the way muscles looked when the person they belonged to was making a specific effort not to let anything through. She had a sudden visceral memory of him at 15, standing in a school corridor while three older boys said things to her that she would not dignify by repeating, and the specific quality of his stillness then. Not fear, not hesitation, but the calm concentration of someone deciding exactly how much force a situation required. He had walked forward and said 4 words. She couldn't even remember what the words were. She remembered the 3 boys walking away very quickly. She remembered thinking, I have never in my life felt this safe. Minjun, she said. He looked at her. I'm going to be honest with you about something. You usually are. Flat. Not a compliment, not an accusation, just a statement of observed fact, which was somehow more intimate than either. This program will work. Your injury profile is serious, but it's not insurmountable. The surgical repair was clean. I've reviewed the imaging 3 times this morning. There's real neural pathway activity in both legs, which means mobility recovery is genuinely possible. She set down the questionnaire. But it requires consistency. It requires honesty about pain levels, about setbacks, about the days when nothing works and your body refuses what your mind is telling it to do. And it requires you to trust me enough to let me do my job. Something crossed his face. Trust you, he said. Professionally. I understand we have... She paused. History. I understand that history is complicated, but inside this room I need you to treat me as your physician, not as someone from your past. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she could hear the building's ventilation system, the distant sound of a cart moving down the corridor outside, a phone ringing somewhere on the floor. Can you do that? She said. Zenyu? He said. She held his gaze. Yes. Another long pause. Then he said, show me the program. She spent the next 40 minutes walking him through the rehabilitation framework, the progression from basic range of motion work to supported standing to assisted walking, the timeline benchmarks, the pain management protocol, the complementary treatments she recommended alongside the physical sessions. He listened with the focused, dispassionate attention of someone accustomed to being briefed. He asked 3 questions, all of them precise and clinically relevant. He did not ask anything personal. When they were done, she stood to indicate the session was ending. He didn't move toward the door. He was looking at the folder on her desk, not her preliminary framework, the other one. His intake folder, still sitting where she'd left it when she first opened it that morning. You kept it out, he said. She looked at the folder. Standard practice. Patient files stay visible during... You'd already filed everything else. He nodded at the organized stacks on either side of her desk, the closed cabinet drawer behind her, the empty inbox tray. That one you left out. She didn't say anything. 13 years, he said again. Quietly. Different inflection this time, less accusation, more something she didn't have a clean name for. Minjun, I believed you left because you wanted to. He was still looking at the folder, not at her. I spent a long time believing that. The afternoon light had gone flat and gray through the windows. Somewhere down the hall, a physical therapy session was making noise, someone counting reps, equipment shifting, the encouraging bark of a technician, life continuing in its ordinary channels. How long? She asked. She hadn't meant to ask. The words came out anyway. He looked up from the folder. Years, he said, simply. She felt the weight of that word, the way you felt a change in air pressure. Not painful, exactly, but impossible to ignore. Something shifting in the atmosphere of the room. He turned the wheelchair toward the door. The 2 security men materialized from the corridor immediately, falling into position. Professional. Practiced. The movements of people who had done this 10,000 times. At the door he stopped. 2 o'clock, he said without turning around. I'll be here. She watched him go. Watched the door pull closed behind the last security man. Listened to the receding sound of the wheelchair on the corridor floor until she couldn't hear it anymore. Then she sat down in her chair, put both hands over her face, and took 3 very slow, very deliberate breaths. She was 34 years old. She was a department head at one of the top rehabilitation centers in South Korea. She had survived leukemia, 2 relapses, a bone marrow transplant, and the specific misery of rebuilding a life from the cellular level upward. She had made it here through sheer accumulated effort, and she was not going to let 4 words and a pair of eyes that still looked at her like she was the only fixed point in a room full of moving things undo 13 years of careful construction. She was not going to do that. She picked up her coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. What? The first session happened 3 days later. The rehabilitation gym on the 14th floor was a wide, well-lit space with padded floors and ceiling-mounted support rails, and equipment ranging from basic resistance bands to a bodyweight suspension system that cost roughly as much as a mid-range apartment. Nyla ran 2 other sessions before Minjun's set. A 60-year-old construction contractor rebuilding shoulder function after a workplace injury, and a 22-year-old competitive swimmer with nerve damage in her left hand. Both were good patients, consistent, willing. Minjun arrived at precisely 2 o'clock with 2 security men and the expression of someone attending a meeting they had decided to endure rather than enjoy. Nyla had learned, in the 3 days between his intake and his first session, that Jung Minjun was not a name spoken lightly in Seoul. She had known this vaguely at 17. She had understood that his family was powerful in ways that the word family didn't fully capture, and that the fear other students had of him was not performative. But she had been 17. The full picture had not been accessible to her then. It was accessible now. She wasn't naive enough to pretend she hadn't done her research. She also wasn't naive enough to let it change anything about how she ran her sessions. "We're starting on the mat today," she said when he rolled through the door. "I need a baseline assessment of your lower body response, sensation, reflex, voluntary movement range. It's going to be slow, and it's going to be tedious, and some of it is going to be uncomfortable." "Fine. Your security team waits outside." One of the men started to object. Minjun stopped him with that same 2-finger gesture she'd seen in the office. The men stepped out. Getting him from the wheelchair to the mat was the first negotiation. He wanted to do it himself. She needed to assist to prevent the kind of lateral stress on the spinal column that would set his recovery back 2 weeks. They reached an agreement that involved her guiding rather than lifting, his arms taking most of the weight transfer, and a careful, precise movement sequence that took 4 minutes and cost him more than he let on. She could see it in the whitening of his knuckles on the transfer board, the controlled exhale through his nose that meant he was managing something. "Pain level," she said once he was on the mat. 5. "Try again." A pause. 6. "Thank you." She knelt beside him and began the assessment. "Tell me immediately if any sensation changes, numbness, sharpness, anything that feels different from your baseline." The next 45 minutes were clinical and methodical, and she kept them that way through focused professional effort. She tested sensation with a standardized instrument from his feet upward, marking the response levels on her chart. She assessed voluntary muscle activation in both legs. Left showed stronger response than right, which aligned with the imaging. She tested reflex response at the knee and ankle. She asked him to attempt 3 controlled movements and documented the results without comment. "I was a good patient in the way that difficult people were sometimes unexpectedly good patients. Not because it was comfortable, but because he had decided to commit. And when Minjun committed to something, it was apparently absolute. He answered her questions accurately. He followed instructions without arguing. When she asked him to attempt something that failed, he tried again without being asked. It was the second attempt at voluntary knee extension on the right side when it happened. The movement was small, partial, maybe 30% of the full range. But it was voluntary, and it was measurable, and it was more than the previous attempt. He felt it. She could see the moment it registered. Something shifted in his face, fast and then immediately controlled, like a light switching on and then a hand covering it. "Good," she said, keeping her voice neutral, clinical. Because this was important. Celebrating too early, making too much of small gains, could create psychological fragility around setbacks. She had learned that from experience. That's progress. Write that down in your body. Remember what that felt like. We're going to be chasing that sensation for the next several weeks. He was looking at his own leg, at the knee that had moved. "It felt different," he said, quiet. Almost not for her. "Different how?" "Like it remembered." He paused. "Like something came back." She wrote on her chart. Her handwriting was steady. She kept it steady. "That's neural reconnection," she said. "The pathway isn't gone. It's been disrupted by the trauma. What you're feeling is the signal finding its way through again." She looked up. "This is a good sign, a genuinely good sign." He looked at her then. For one unguarded second. Just one. The kind that happened before the conscious mind caught up to the emotional one. He looked at her the exact same way he used to look at her across a school cafeteria when she'd managed to hold her ground against something that would have broken most people, like she was evidence of something he needed to keep believing in. Then the guard came back up and he looked at the ceiling. "What's next?" he said. She told him. They worked for another 20 minutes. By the end, he was pale under his complexion, and his jaw had that carved quality that meant he was in more pain than he was reporting, but he finished every exercise on the list without modification. When they were done, she helped him back into the wheelchair and handed him a water bottle and gave him a moment before she said anything. "You're going to be sore tomorrow," she said. "I'm always sore. More sore. The kind that means things are working, but it doesn't feel like that from the inside." She made a note on the chart. "Heat or cold on the lower back tonight, whichever you respond better to. No alcohol. And I need you to log your pain levels morning and evening in the app my team will send you." "I don't use apps." "Then write it down on paper and take a photo. I need the data." He took the water bottle and drank. She started organizing her notes. The room had the particular quiet of late afternoon in a rehabilitation gym. Equipment at rest, light going amber through the windows, the muted sound of the building settling around them. "You know what I am," he said. Not a question. She looked up. "I did research," she said carefully. And? "And you're my patient. What you are outside this room doesn't change what I'm responsible for inside it." He studied her. "Most people make different choices when they know. Most people aren't your rehabilitation doctor." She capped her pen. "I'm not most people. I think we both know that." Something almost happened on his face. Almost, and then didn't quite. "Same time Thursday," he said. "Same time Thursday," she confirmed. He moved toward the door. She watched him go. At the threshold he paused. The same pause as in her office. The same quality of having something to say that was still deciding whether it wanted to be said. "The letters," he said, not turning around. She waited. "If they were intercepted." He said the word like a man picking up a piece of evidence and examining it from all angles. "Someone had to know where you were sending them from." "Yes," she said. "I've thought about that." "Have you thought about who?" She had. She had thought about it at 17, in a Baltimore hospital room, with a needle in her arm and a face she couldn't stop seeing in the ceiling tiles. She had thought about it at 22, when she was well enough to be angry about it. She had mostly stopped thinking about it eventually, because surviving had required forward motion and not backward. "I have some ideas," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "So do I," he said. Then he went through the door, and she stood alone in the rehabilitation gym with the amber light and the quiet equipment and the specific weight of a conversation that had just opened a door that had been shut for 13 years. She looked down at her chart. His knee had moved, 30% of full range. Voluntary, measurable. She wrote it down and told herself that the feeling expanding quietly in her chest was professional satisfaction, and nothing more complicated than that. She was mostly convincing. The sessions continued twice a week for the first 3 weeks, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 o'clock. Minjun arrived exactly on time every session, which she noted in the clinical observation that punctuality in rehabilitation patients was a strong predictor of outcome. He did not make it easy, not because he was uncooperative. He was, by any clinical standard, an excellent patient. He followed protocols, reported pain levels with improving accuracy as she calibrated her assessment methods to his specific patterns of underreporting, and applied himself to every exercise with the kind of concentrated focus that she had previously only seen in professional athletes with a specific championship on the horizon. It was difficult because he was Minjun, and Minjun had always occupied space in a way that made the space feel like it had been waiting for him. He was difficult because when he looked at her, which was frequent and direct and entirely without the social lubricant of looking away, she felt 17 years old and 34 years old simultaneously, and managing 2 ages at once was cognitively expensive. By the 3rd week, the right leg had developed consistent voluntary movement to 60% of normal range. The left was approaching 80. His pain levels on good days had dropped to a 4. He was transferring to and from the wheelchair with decreasing assistance. She told him all of this at the end of the 6th session, sitting across from him in the rehabilitation gym while the late afternoon light did its amber thing and the building settled around them. "You're ahead of the projected timeline," she said. He looked at his hands. "I'm motivated." "That helps, but it's also physiology. Your neural recovery rate is faster than the imaging suggested." She paused. Which tells me the surgical team did excellent work, and also that you were probably in exceptional physical condition before the accident. I work out. I noticed. She made a note, kept her face neutral, moved on. I want to attempt supported standing next Tuesday. The parallel bars. I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that it may not work on the first attempt. He looked at her. It will work, he said. You don't know that. I know my own body. You know your body as it was before the accident. You're learning it again. Those are different things. She held his gaze. If it doesn't work on the first attempt, that is not failure. That is data. Do you understand the difference? A long pause. Tell me about the leukemia, he said. She blinked. The topic shift was so clean and unexpected that for a moment her prepared professional response had nowhere to land. That's not relevant to your rehabilitation. I'm not asking as a patient. I'm asking as someone who spent 13 years believing something that wasn't true. His voice was level. You said you were sick. I want to understand what that meant. She looked at the window for a moment. At the Han River, gray and silver and indifferent in the evening light. I was 17 when I was diagnosed, she said. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. We caught it relatively early, but early is a relative term. The treatment was aggressive, and the first year was... She paused. The first year was bad. I lost about 40 pounds. I lost my hair twice. There were 2 points where my doctors had conversations with my mother that I was not technically supposed to hear. He was very still. The second relapse happened when I was 20, she said. That one was worse than the first. The bone marrow transplant was when I was 21. My younger sister was a match. She looked at her hands. After that, 5 years of monitoring, then clearance. She looked up. I've been in full remission for 8 years. The room held the silence for a moment. Your hair, he said. She touched it reflexively. The natural coils she wore close-cropped, a style she had kept since the second round of treatment because it was easier and then because she had learned to prefer it. It grew back different both times. I kept it short after. I liked it long, he said. Then immediately, that's irrelevant. Yes, she agreed. It is. But neither of them moved or looked away for a few seconds longer than strictly necessary. The letters, she said, returning to solid clinical ground. I wrote the first one from the hospital in Baltimore. I gave the address as our return, my mother's email, our U.S. phone number. If someone was intercepting them, they had to have access to the school's address records, or to your household. Minjun's expression had gone to that specific quality of concentrated stillness. Or both, he said. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. There was a boy in our year, he said, Kang Se-hoon. She knew the name. Of course she knew the name. Si-hoon had been the particular variety of wealthy Korean teenager who wore his family's money like a second skin and used it to practice cruelty on anyone he assessed as below him. He had had specific, persistent, and creative opinions about Nyla's presence at Hansung Prep. He had access to school administration, Minjun continued. His father sat on the board. Si-hoon knew things about students that he shouldn't have known. A pause. He also had a specific interest in anything that affected me. He hated you, she said. He hated that he couldn't touch me. That's different. Minjun's voice was completely flat. He found other ways. The implications of that settled over the room. Minjun, she said slowly. The accident. He looked at her. The collision on the Gangnam Expressway. She kept her voice steady, even as something cold moved through her chest. Was that... I don't know yet, he said. I'm looking into it. If it was deliberate, then someone will answer for it. Not threatening, not dramatic, simply factual, the way he had always stated inevitable things. I need you to stay out of that part. I'm not Nyla, her name in his mouth again. That deliberate second syllable. I need you to hear what I'm saying. Whatever I find on the other side of this investigation, I don't want you near it. She thought about arguing. She looked at his face, at the carefully managed expression that was doing significant work to contain something that she suspected, if uncontained, would be genuinely frightening, and decided that this particular argument could wait. Fine, she said. For now. For now, he repeated, and the slight shift in his expression told her he heard the conditional clearly. She packed up her notes. He moved toward the door. The security men materialized. The session ended the way all their sessions ended, in motion, in controlled departure, in the careful maintenance of a professional distance that neither of them quite managed to make completely convincing. At the door he stopped again. She had started to expect this. The pause. The thing that still hadn't decided whether to be said. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she confirmed. He left. She stood in the rehabilitation gym in the amber light and thought about Kong Se-hoon, and about a collision on the Gangnam Expressway, and about the specific, quiet certainty in Min-jun's voice when he said someone will answer for it. And she thought, not for the first time since his intake folder had appeared on her desk, that this reunion, whatever it was going to become, had not finished surprising her yet. She was right. She did not yet know how right. 3 weeks later, Min-jun stood up, not with the parallel bars. He had mastered those in 2 sessions, which was ahead of every projection she had built into his framework. Not with full support, not with a harness, not with the bodyweight suspension system she had been prepared to deploy. He stood up from his wheelchair in the middle of the rehabilitation gym, using nothing but the muscles that 3 months ago had been dormant and damaged and silent. He stood for 11 seconds before his knees buckled and Nyla caught him. She was already moving, already close enough, because she knew him well enough by then to see it coming in the set of his jaw and the quality of his breathing. And they ended up with her arms around him and his hands gripping her forearms and his face very close to hers, and both of them breathing harder than the situation strictly required. 11 seconds, she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. I counted, he said. His voice was not entirely steady either. They were very close. Close enough that she could see the scar along his jaw clearly. Close enough that she was acutely aware of the fact that he was holding her forearms and not letting go. Close enough that the professional distance she had been maintaining with such careful, deliberate effort was currently, at this specific moment, approximately 0. Min-jun, she said. I know, he said. Neither of them moved. Outside, somewhere in the building, a phone rang twice and stopped. Then his security detail opened the gym door 3 inches, and the moment broke, and they stepped back from each other with the particular careful coordination of 2 people who had just been standing on the edge of something and had mutually, silently decided to step back. For now, Nyla turned to her chart. Her handwriting, when she wrote voluntary unsupported standing, 11 seconds, week 9, was not as steady as it should have been. She made a note to herself to be more careful. She made a note to herself about a lot of things. But in the hallway outside, one of Min-jun's security men had just received a call that he took 3 steps away to answer, and the expression on his face when he turned back toward the gym door was not professional neutrality. It was something else entirely. Something that, had Nyla seen it, would have told her immediately that the 11 seconds were about to become the least significant thing that happened that day. She didn't see it. Not yet. The security man's name was Park Do-hyun, and he had worked for Jang Min-jun for 9 years, which meant he had developed a specific and finely calibrated understanding of when to bring bad news immediately and when to let his employer finish what he was doing first. He stood outside the rehabilitation gym door with his phone in his hand and made the calculation in approximately 4 seconds. He knocked. Min-jun came out 2 minutes later, wheeling himself into the corridor with the particular economy of movement he had developed over the past 3 months. Efficient, precise, conserving nothing unnecessarily. His sleeves were pushed to the elbows. There was a faint flush across the top of his cheekbones that Do-hyun had learned to recognize as the specific aftermath of physical exertion that his employer would never verbally acknowledge. Report, Min-jun said. Do-hyun held out the phone. On the screen was a photograph. Surveillance quality, slightly grainy, time-stamped 40 minutes ago. A man in a dark overcoat standing outside the main entrance of Seohan Medical Center. Hands in pockets, looking up at the building's facade with the particular quality of attention that was not curiosity. Min-jun looked at the photograph for 3 seconds. When did he arrive? 42 minutes ago. He stayed for 11 minutes, then left in a black sedan. Plates came back registered to a shell company. Do-hyun paused. That traces back to KSH Capital Holdings. The corridor was quiet. Down the hall, the sound of the rehabilitation gym door opening. Nyla's voice, brief and professional, speaking to one of her staff. Min-jun did not look toward the sound. He knows I'm here, Min-jun said. Yes. He's been watching the facility, possibly longer than today. Do-hyun kept his voice level. We swept for surveillance hardware in the parking structure yesterday. Found 2 cameras that don't belong to the hospital's security system. Removed them. But if they've been in place for any length of time, he already has what he needs. Minjun handed the phone back. His voice had not changed. His expression had not changed. That was the thing about Minjun that Do-hyun had spent 9 years learning to read. The absence of visible reaction was never the absence of reaction. It was the presence of something being held very still. Increase the perimeter. 2 additional men on the building entrance. I want eyes on every vehicle that parks within 100 meters of this facility. Understood. Do-hyun hesitated. 1 beat. And Dr. Brooks? Minjun looked at him. She's a visible connection, Do-hyun said carefully. If Se-hoon has been watching the building, he's seen her. He knows she's your treating physician. If he's willing to arrange a vehicle collision to... She gets a detail, Minjun said. Discreet. She doesn't need to know about it yet. She won't like that. No, Minjun agreed. She won't. He turned the wheelchair back toward the elevator. Do-hyun fell into position 2 steps behind. Get me everything Se-hoon has been doing in the last 6 months, Minjun said. Business dealings, travel, anyone he's met with more than twice. I want a complete picture by tomorrow morning. Already started. Minjun pressed the elevator button, watched the numbers descend. And Do-hyun. Sir, nobody touches him yet. The elevator opened. I want to understand the full shape of what he did before I decide what to do about it. The doors closed. Nyla found out about the security detail on a Thursday morning when she walked out of her apartment building at 7:15, and a man she had never seen before fell into step approximately 8 feet behind her. She stopped walking. He stopped walking. She turned around. He was broad-shouldered, dark jacket, early 30s, with the specific quality of stillness she had by now learned to associate with Minjun's people. He met her eyes without apology. Who sent you? She said. Not a question. Dr. Brooks? Who sent you? A pause. Mr. Jang asked us to follow me without telling me. Her voice was flat. Without asking me. Without considering for 1 second that I might have an opinion about whether a stranger follows me to work every morning. The man, to his credit, did not try to soften it. Yes. Go back, she said. Tell him we need to talk. Today. She walked to the hospital alone, which was either brave or foolish, and she was too angry to determine which. She spent the 30-minute walk cycling through the specific variety of fury that came from having your autonomy overridden by someone who was simultaneously the reason your chest did complicated things when he looked at you, which she found made the fury more complicated and therefore worse. She was waiting in the rehabilitation gym when he arrived at 2 o'clock. She let him get fully through the door before she said anything. You put surveillance on me, she said. He didn't look surprised that she knew. A protective detail. There's a difference. There isn't, when I didn't consent to it. Someone has been watching this building. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath the control that was doing real work to stay there. Someone with a history of deciding that the most efficient solution to a problem is removing the problem entirely. You are a visible connection to me. That makes you a potential target. She stared at him. Kang Se-hoon. Yes. You think he arranged the accident? I think the evidence is pointing in a direction that I'm taking seriously. He met her eyes. I think you should take it seriously too. I do take it seriously. I'm also not a piece on your board that you get to move without telling me. She crossed her arms. I'm a person, Minjun, not a liability to be managed. Something moved across his face. That's exactly what it is. You made a security decision about my life and didn't tell me. You didn't ask me. You just arranged it. She exhaled. I spent 13 years having things arranged around me without my knowledge. I don't do that anymore. The silence that followed had texture. She could see him absorbing that, not defensively, but with the particular quality of attention he brought to things that mattered. Processing. Reassessing. You're right, he said. She had expected an argument. The absence of one was disorienting. The detail was a poor decision, he continued. I should have told you. Explained the situation and let you decide. He paused. I'm telling you now. Now that I already know. Yes. His jaw shifted slightly. I'm not good at this. At what? At... He stopped. Started again. at having things that matter to me that I can't control the perimeter of. The gym was very quiet. Outside the windows, Seoul was doing its mid-afternoon thing, the distant texture of traffic, a plane crossing high and small, light shifting through thin cloud. She uncrossed her arms. "Tell me about Sehun," she said. "All of it," he told her. It took 20 minutes. He spoke without embellishment, the way he delivered all information, clean, sequential, factual. Kang Sehun, son of Kang Byung-woo of the KSH Industrial Group, now running significant portions of his father's financial empire. A man who had spent his adolescence in the particular misery of being wealthy enough to want for nothing except the things he actually wanted, which had primarily been Min-jun's respect and Nyla's departure. A man who had grown into the kind of adult who remembered old humiliations with the precise, curated bitterness of someone who had never learned to put anything down. The surveillance cameras outside the hospital, the shell company, the collision on the Gangnam Expressway. 6 weeks before Min-jun had appeared on her intake list, a high-speed impact on a rain-slicked highway that every accident report characterized as a tragic road incident, and that Min-jun's people were increasingly convinced had been neither tragic nor accidental. The driver of the other vehicle, Min-jun said, a man named Oh Jae-sung. He has significant gambling debt. 3 months before the accident, that debt was quietly settled by an entity that my investigators have traced, through 4 layers of financial obfuscation, back to a KSH subsidiary. Nyla sat with that for a moment. "That's not conclusive," she said carefully. "No, not yet. But you believe it." "My instincts have been reliable for a long time." Flat. "Yes, I believe it." She thought about Sehun at 17, the particular quality of his cruelty, which had always been strategic rather than impulsive. The way he had never done anything directly, always at an angle, always with distance between himself and the consequence. She thought about the letters that hadn't arrived, the calls that hadn't connected. "The letters," she said. Min-jun looked at her. "I've thought about that." Sehun's father was on the school board. Sehun had access to administration. She was working it out as she said it, the pieces clicking with the specific nausea of things that should have been obvious years ago. "He knew where I was going. He knew the U.S. address. He could have—" "Yes," Min-jun said quietly. "He stole that." Her voice came out harder than she intended. "He took 13 years from us." She stopped, heard herself, looked at the window for a second. "From both of us." "Yes," Min-jun said again. "Same word, different weight." She looked back at him. He was watching her with that expression, the one that gave nothing away and gave everything away at the same time, the one that she had been 17 years old the first time she'd learned to read it and was apparently still capable of reading it perfectly now. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Build a case. My investigators are working on getting Oh Jae-sung's testimony. He's scared enough and broke enough that I think he can be convinced to tell the truth." He paused. "When we have something concrete, I'll turn it over to someone in the prosecutor's office I trust." She blinked. "You're going to use legitimate legal channels." "I considered other options." His voice was completely neutral. "I decided against them." She understood with the particular clarity of knowing someone very well that this was not the approach that came naturally to him, that it was a decision made with effort and for a reason he wasn't stating explicitly. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Because a criminal case will end Sehun permanently and cleanly, and because—" He stopped. A pause that had something careful in it. "Because I don't want to be something specific in front of you." The gym was very quiet. "Min-gun," she said, "don't." "Quiet. I'm aware of what I am. I'm not asking you to adjust your view of it." He looked at his hands. "I'm just telling you the truth of why I'm doing it this way." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside, a siren passed somewhere below, rose and fell and disappeared. "The detail," she said finally. "I'll accept one person, someone I know by name and face. They stay at a reasonable distance and they don't enter my apartment building." He looked up. "That's my condition," she said. "Take it, or we're going to have this argument every week." Something that was not quite a smile crossed his face. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. "Agreed," he said. "What?" The next 3 weeks were the most intense of the rehabilitation program. Min-gun walked the parallel bars for the first time in week 10. Unsteady, his knuckles white on the rails, sweat visible at his temple by the second step, jaw set with a ferocity that she suspected had very little to do with the physical effort and everything to do with something internal that she was not entitled to name. He made it 8 meters before his legs gave out, and she caught him, and he said nothing for 30 seconds afterward, just breathed, hands still gripping the rail. Again, he said, "We're done for today." Again. "Min-jun, your body is telling you something." "My body is wrong." He looked at her. Again. She looked back. "If you push past the threshold today, you'll lose 2 days of progress to inflammation and pain management. You'll be starting this same distance on Thursday instead of progressing." She kept her voice even. "Is that what you want?" The muscle in his jaw worked. "No," he said. "Then we're done." She helped him back to the wheelchair. He was quiet through the transfer, through the cool-down stretches, through the 20 minutes of soft tissue work on his lower back that had become a standard end-of-session element because his pain levels after intensive sessions spiked in a way that required intervention. She worked methodically, the way she always did, maintaining the clinical distance that she always maintained. Except that they were 3 weeks past the moment in this gym where he had stood for 11 seconds, and she had caught him, and their faces had been approximately 6 inches apart. And the professional distance she maintained was increasingly made of the same material as set concrete, structurally sound, but cold and requiring significant ongoing effort to keep from cracking. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm concentrating." "You're always concentrating. This is different." She said nothing. Nyla. "I'm thinking about Si-hoon," she said, which was true as far as it went. "Your investigator, the one working on O.J. Sung. How close are they?" A pause. He accepted the subject change with the grace of someone choosing their battles. "Close. Jae-sung has made 2 calls to one of my people in the last week. He's scared. Se-hoon doesn't maintain loyalty well. He paid for the job, but he hasn't protected Jae-sung the way Jae-sung expected to be protected afterward. That's a crack." "How long?" "Days, maybe. A week at most." His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that ran deeper than the investigation. She could feel it in the tension across his lower back, in the way the muscles held differently today than they had last Tuesday. "When he talks, it moves fast. I already have the prosecutor contact. The evidentiary chain is ready." He paused. "It ends Se-hoon." "Good," she said, quietly. She worked in silence for another few minutes. Nyla, quieter now. "Don't. I haven't said anything yet. I know what you're about to say." She kept her hands moving, clinical, methodical. "And I'm telling you not to say it." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" he said. "Because we're in the middle of a rehabilitation program, and you're in a vulnerable physical state, and I'm your treating physician, and there are 18 different clinical ethics reasons why this—" She stopped, breathed. "Why this is the wrong time for whatever you're about to say." "And when the program ends?" She didn't answer. 12 weeks, he said. "Maybe 6 more sessions. And then I'm not your patient anymore." "Min-jun, I'm not asking for anything right now." His voice was steady. Patient in the way that was particularly Min-jun, not passive, but deliberate. The way a river was patient, it was going somewhere, it had always been going somewhere, and the rocks in its path were an inconvenience rather than an obstacle. "I'm asking you to tell me that the question will still be worth asking when the time is right." She pressed her palms flat against his lower back, felt the tension there, the realness of him, weight, warmth, the specific human fact of a person she had known at 17 and was knowing again now at 34, differently, more completely, with the specific ache of all the years between. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly. This time. He was very still. "Okay," he said. One word. The way he said things that mattered. She finished the session. He transferred back to the wheelchair. She walked with him to the corridor door, which she did not always do, and Do-hyun was waiting with the other man, the one she now knew by name, Shin Tae-won, her assigned detail, who gave her a respectful nod every morning outside her building. Min-jun stopped at the corridor threshold. The pause. She had learned this pause. She had learned to wait it out. "Si-hoon reached out today," he said, not turning around. "Through an intermediary. He's suggesting a meeting." She went still. "Don't." "I know." "Min-jun." If he's suggesting a meeting, it's because he knows you're close to something and he wants to control the conversation before it happens. I know. He turned slightly. Not fully, just enough that she could see the line of his jaw. I'm not going to meet with him. I'm telling you because you should know the shape of where this is. Which is where? A beat. It's about to break, he said. One way or another. Be ready. He went through the door. She stood in the corridor and watched him go and felt the particular quality of the silence he left behind. Not empty, never empty, always carrying the specific weight of everything that hadn't been said and everything that had. She went back to her office. She sat at her desk. She opened the next patient file. Her phone rang before she got past the first page. The number on the screen was one she didn't recognize. A Seoul area code. Nothing saved in her contacts. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. A voice she hadn't heard in 13 years said, "Dr. Brooks? It's been a long time. Kang Se-hoon." She didn't speak. Her hand on the phone was completely steady. She was very proud of how steady it was. "I think we should have a conversation," he said pleasantly. The pleasantness was the worst part. It had always been the worst part with Se-hoon, the smooth social performance wrapped around something that had the temperature of a blade. Before things become unnecessarily complicated. "How did you get this number?" she said. "The same way I get most things." A pause. "I want you to understand something, Dr. Brooks. What's happening right now doesn't need to involve you. You're a very talented physician. You have an impressive career. It would be a shame if complications arose around it." Her jaw tightened. "Are you threatening me?" she said. "I'm offering you perspective." Still pleasant. "Minjun has a way of making the people around him targets. You've been his doctor for 3 months. That's long enough for associations to form. Associations have consequences. Is that what you told Oh Jae-sung before he drove his car into Minjun's?" The words came out before she could stop them. A silence. When Se-hoon spoke again, the pleasantness had changed register. Still there, but thinner. "You should be careful what you suggest." "I think you should be careful," she said, "about what you've built and where it's going." Her voice was steady. She was a little amazed by how steady. 13 years ago, you took something from both of us. I don't know yet exactly how you did it or the full shape of what you thought it would accomplish, but I know it was you, and now you've tried to kill him. She paused. How is that working out for you? The silence stretched. Goodbye, Dr. Brooks, he said. The call ended. She set the phone down on her desk very carefully. Then she picked it up again and called Min Jun. He answered on the second ring. Si-hoon just called me, she said. A beat of silence that had significant weight. He called you directly. Not a question. His voice had gone to that very particular quality, the ones she associated with the 11 seconds in the gym and the parallel bars, and Oh Jae-sung's settled gambling debt, the quality of something being held with extreme precision, because precision was the only thing preventing it from becoming something else entirely. Yes. What did he say? She told him. All of it, including what she had said back. When she finished, there was a silence on the line that lasted long enough that she checked the screen to confirm the call was still connected. Min Jun, I need you to go home, he said. Now. Taewon will meet you downstairs in 5 minutes. The session isn't Nyla. Her name. That deliberate second syllable. Please. She heard it. The word he almost never used. The thing underneath the control that had been doing all that work, and was now, just barely, showing its edge. All right, she said quietly. I'm going. She gathered her things. In the elevator down, she thought about Se-hoon's voice. The thinness under the pleasantness when she'd said Oh Jae-sung's name. The way the temperature of the call had changed. She had hit something real. She had also, she was now fairly certain, just made herself significantly more visible to a man who solved problems by making them disappear. Taewon was waiting in the lobby exactly as promised. He fell into position without a word. Outside, Seoul was doing its evening thing. Lights beginning to assert themselves against the darkening sky. The river in the distance catching the last of the flat gray light. Her phone buzzed. A text from Min Jun. Jason called my investigator an hour ago. He wants to talk. Tomorrow morning. She read it twice. Then a second message arrived. Si-hoon knows. He must have people watching Jae-sung too. Tomorrow changes everything. She stood on the pavement outside Seohan Medical Center with Taewon, a careful 8 feet behind her, and the city moving around her in its indifferent way, and understood with the specific clarity of a situation arriving at its breaking point, that whatever had been building for 3 months, the sessions, the 11 seconds, the parallel bars, the phone call, 13 years of intercepted letters, and a collision on a rain-slicked highway, was about to become something she could no longer observe from the careful clinical distance she had built. She texted back, "Be careful tomorrow. 3 seconds. Always." She put the phone in her pocket and started walking, and somewhere across the city Kang Se-hoon was making his own calculations, and Oh Jae-sung was sitting in a room somewhere deciding whether the truth was worth the cost of telling it, and Jang Min-jun was doing whatever Jang Min-jun did when he was alone, and the control had somewhere to finally set itself down. Tomorrow, everything would break open. She just didn't know yet which direction the pieces would fall. Oh Jae-sung was a small man in the way that certain men became small, not in physical stature, which was average, but in the particular compressed quality of someone who had spent years making himself less visible and had mostly succeeded. He was 41 years old, had a scar above his left eyebrow from a bicycle accident at age 9, and had been driving commercial vehicles in Seoul for 14 years before a gambling habit and a debt collector's patience ran out at roughly the same time. He sat across from Min-jun's chief investigator, a woman named Cho Yeon-ji, who had the kind of face that gave nothing away and the kind of eyes that took everything in a private room above a restaurant in Mapo, that Min-jun used for conversations that required neither witnesses nor ambient noise. Min-jun was not in the room. He was watching through a camera feed on a tablet, seated in a car parked 2 blocks away, with Do-hyun beside him, and the city moving past the tinted windows in its indifferent morning way. It was 7:48. Nyla would be arriving at the hospital in approximately 20 minutes. Taewon had confirmed she had left her apartment building at 7:15, same as every morning. On the tablet screen, Jae-sung was drinking the tea that Yeon-ji had placed in front of him with the careful, deliberate movements of a man who needed something to do with his hands. "Take your time," Yeon-ji said. "I don't—" Jae-sung stopped, set the cup down. "I don't want to be here. I want you to understand that. I'm not here because I want to be. I understand." "If he finds out I talked, he won't find out from us," Yeon-ji said. "You have my employer's word on that." Jae-sung looked at the table, at his hands, at the middle distance between himself and a decision he had apparently been approaching for weeks, and had finally arrived at, with the exhausted resignation of a man who had run out of other directions. "He came to me through an intermediary," Jae-sung said. "February, 8 months before the accident. The intermediary said there was work available for a driver who knew how to be discreet. I needed the money." He stopped. "I thought it was something minor, transporting something, moving someone who didn't want to be seen moving." "But it wasn't," Yeon-ji said. "No." He exhaled, long and slow. "They told me 3 weeks before what it actually was. By then I'd already taken the advance payment and the debt was cleared, and He pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. "I told myself it was just a scare, that the impact would be controlled, that nobody would—" He stopped. Min-jun watched the screen. His face was completely still. Do-hyun, beside him, said nothing. "The instructions were specific," Jae-sung continued. "Speed, angle of impact, which vehicle. They had studied the route. They knew where he would be." He looked up at Yeon-ji with the eyes of someone carrying something they have not slept under in months. "I didn't know it was him. Not until afterward. Not until I saw the news reports and recognized the car." "You didn't know the target was Jang Min-jun," Yeon-ji said carefully. "I knew it was someone powerful. I didn't know who." He paused. "Does it matter?" Yeon-ji didn't answer that. "Who gave you the instructions?" A silence. "The intermediary's name was Park Sung-chul," Jae-sung said. "He works directly for Kang Se-hoon. I've seen them together. Sung-chul delivered the payment. Sung-chul gave the specifications." He folded his hands on the table. They were not steady. "I can put Sung-chul at the meeting. I have a recording." Yeon-ji's expression did not change. "You recorded the meeting?" "I recorded every meeting after the first one." He reached into his jacket and placed a small device on the table. "I don't know why I did it. I told myself it was insurance. I think I knew somewhere that I was going to end up in a room exactly like this one eventually." He looked at the device. "It's all there, Sung-chul's voice, the instructions, the payment amount, the date." He paused. Sungchul mentioned Se-hoon by name twice. Minjun set the tablet on his knee. Get him to the prosecutor, he said to Do-hyun. Today. I want him in a formal interview before noon. Already arranged, Do-hyun said. Yeonji has the contact. Minjun looked out the window. The morning was flat and gray, the same gray it had been for 3 days, the sky holding the specific quality of Seoul in late autumn, cold without committing to it, overcast without raining, suspended. Se-hoon knows this is happening, Minjun said. Probably. How much time do we have before he moves? Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. If he's been watching Jae-sung the same way he's been watching the hospital, he may already know Jae-sung came here this morning. Minjun picked up his phone. He called Nyla. She answered on the first ring, which meant she had been expecting the call. How did it go? He talked. He has recordings. Minjun kept his voice even. We're moving to the prosecutor today. A pause on her end. That's good. That's another pause. That's it then. Very nearly. He looked out the window. Stay in the hospital today. Don't leave for lunch. I'll explain more tonight. Minjun, please, he said. She heard the word the same way she always heard it when he used it. The weight of it, the specific rarity that gave it mass. All right, he hung up. In the restaurant room on the tablet screen, Yeonji was reaching for the recording device. The room was quiet. Chae-sung was still staring at his hands. Minjun thought about Se-hoon, about the photograph from outside the hospital, about the phone call to Nyla, about the specific variety of man who solved problems by making them disappear, and had been making them disappear, evidently, since they were all 17 years old in a school in northern Seoul. He thought about the letters. He thought about Nyla at 17, in a hospital he hadn't known about, writing letters that had gone nowhere. He thought about 11 seconds on a rehabilitation gym floor, her hands on his forearms, 6 inches of air between their faces. He thought, end this today. Let's go, he said to Do-hyun. The prosecutor's name was Han Jae-won, and she had been handling organized crime cases in Seoul for 11 years, which meant she had long since stopped being surprised by what landed on her desk, and had developed instead a specific surgical patience for the moment, when a case that had been circling its target finally found the angle it needed. Minjun had used her once before, 3 years ago, in a matter involving a rival operation and a series of wire transfers that had required careful navigation to untangle. She was not his ally. She was very specifically not his ally, and had made that clear at their first meeting with the particular bluntness of someone who wanted no ambiguity about the nature of their professional relationship. But she was honest, which in Minjun's experience was rarer than competent, and considerably more valuable. They met in her office at 11. Hae-sung was already there, sitting to one side of the room with a public defender who had arrived with impressive speed, suggesting that arrangements had been made in advance. Yeonji sat to the other side. Minjun's presence was acknowledged. Han Jae-won looked at him across her desk with the expression of someone choosing not to address something they will address later, and then she looked at the recording device on her desk and she pressed play. The room listened. Park Sung-chul's voice came through the small speaker with the particular clarity of a recording made close and clean, careful words, specific instructions, and twice, in the space of 4 minutes, the name Kang Se-hoon spoken with the casual familiarity of a man who had no idea he was building the architecture of his employer's destruction. When it ended, Han Jae-won was quiet for a long moment. How long has your office been working on this? She asked Minjun. 6 weeks, he said. And you're bringing it to me now because this morning Se-hoon called my rehabilitation physician directly and suggested consequences for her continued association with me. He kept his voice level, which indicates he knows his position is deteriorating and is looking for leverage. I don't want to give him time to find it. Han Jae-won looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the recording device. Then she picked up her phone. I'll need Jae-sung informal interview within the hour, she said. And I'll need everything your investigator has on the financial chain, the debt settlement, the shell company, all of it. She paused. This goes to an arrest warrant by end of day if the documentation holds. It holds, Minjun said. She looked at him again. You understand that if this prosecution proceeds, I will not be distinguishing between your operation and Se-hoon's in terms of what this investigation surfaces. I understand. And you're proceeding anyway. He met her eyes. Some things are more important than operational exposure. She held his gaze for a moment. Something passed across her face. Not warmth, not approval, but something that was possibly a recalibration. Leave me to work, she said. Minjun was in the car outside Han Jae-won's building at 12:40 when Do Hyun's phone rang. Do Hyun answered, listened for approximately 8 seconds, and then said something very quiet and very controlled that made Minjun turn and look at him. Do Hyun's face had gone to a specific quality that Minjun had seen perhaps 3 times in 9 years. The quality of someone delivering information they would genuinely prefer not to be delivering. Report, Minjun said. Park Sung-chul, Do Hyun said. Si-hoon's intermediary. He paused. He was found in his apartment 40 minutes ago. Minjun went completely still. He's alive, Do Hyun said quickly, but critical. Someone got to him this morning. Before Jae-sung's interview, either Se-hoon moved faster than we anticipated, or he had contingency surveillance on Sung-chul we didn't know about. He paused. He can't testify. Not today. Possibly not for weeks. The car was very quiet. Mingun looked out the windshield at the street. At the ordinary morning Seoul moving past. A delivery truck. 2 women with coffee cups. A man walking a dog on a red leash. All of it continuing exactly as it always continued, regardless of what was happening in the interior of a single parked car. The recording was still valid. Jae-sung's testimony was still valid. The financial documentation was still valid. But Si-hoon had just demonstrated with very clean and very brutal economy that he was not going to wait to see how the evidence assembled itself. He was going to remove the pieces. Sung-chul today, who tomorrow? Minjun picked up his phone and called Nyla. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He called Taewon. Taewon answered immediately. Sir? Where's Dr. Brooks? 14th floor. She had back-to-back sessions this afternoon. She asked me to wait in the... A pause. A pause that lasted 2 seconds too long. Sir, she came down for a patient consult at noon. She should have returned to the floor by now, but I haven't... Find her, Minjun said. His voice was very quiet. Right now. He was already telling Do Hyun to drive before the call ended. Nyla had made a mistake. She knew it approximately 40 seconds after she made it, which was approximately 40 seconds too late. The consult had been legitimate, a text from the hospital's internal system, a patient in the neurology ward on the 8th floor requesting a rehabilitation assessment. She had gone down. The neurology nurse at the station had looked at her request form with a blankness that told her immediately that no such consult had been ordered. She had turned around. The corridor was not empty. The man who stepped out of the stairwell door was large, dark jacket, and had the specific quality of someone whose presence in a hospital corridor made no clinical sense. A second man appeared from the direction of the elevator bank. She had her phone out before she fully processed what she was doing, which was, she reflected in that particular compressed second, good instinct. But the first man's hand was faster than her thumb on the screen. They did not hurt her. She noted this with the clinical precision of someone whose brain had defaulted to observation as a coping mechanism. They took the phone. They walked her, one on each side, with the firm and practiced pressure of people who had done this before, through a door she didn't use because it accessed the facility's back service corridor, down a stairwell that smelled of concrete and cleaning fluid, through another door into what was clearly a maintenance area, exposed pipes, industrial lighting, the distant sound of the building's mechanical systems. Si-hoon was waiting. He looked almost exactly the same as he had at 17, which she found profoundly irritating. Taller, more expensive clothing, the particular polish of a man who had spent his adult life being very rich. But the same eyes, the same quality of looking at people as problems that existed in varying states of resolution. Dr. Brooks, he said. Thank you for coming. I didn't have a choice, she said. That's true. He said it with the pleasantness she remembered from the phone call. The thinness was more visible now, up close, like paint on a wall that had been applied over something that was slowly coming through. I want to keep this brief. I respect your time. Where's my phone? You'll have it back shortly. He gestured toward 2 folding chairs that had been placed in the space, the specific studied casualness of a gesture that had been planned. She did not sit. He looked at her standing and did not push the point. I want to discuss what's happening with Minjun's legal situation. Then discuss it with Minjun. I would rather discuss it with you. The pleasantness shifted. You have influence over him. You know that. I think you've known it since you came back into his life. He tilted his head. Tell him to withdraw. Tell him to take what he has and walk away. The prosecutor's case has complications that he isn't aware of yet. Complications that will affect more than just his legal exposure. She looked at him steadily. Her pulse was elevated. She was aware of it with the specific dissociated precision of someone who had spent time in situations where panic was not an option. Chemotherapy wards, bone marrow transplant recovery rooms, the particular school corridors of her adolescence. What complications? She said. The investigator he's been using, Cho Yeon-ji. Sehun's voice was mild, conversational. She's been thorough, impressively thorough. He paused. She's also been thorough in directions Minjun hasn't authorized. Some of what she's found doesn't implicate me, Dr. Brooks. His eyes held hers. It implicates people close to him, people he trusts. She felt something shift in the room's air pressure. What people? She said. I think that's a conversation for him to have with her. Sehun's pleasantness had settled into something worse than hostility. Satisfaction, careful and old, the satisfaction of someone who had been holding a card for a very long time and had finally found the right moment to set it on the table. All I need is for you to pass along a message. Tell him to think carefully about what Yeonji has actually been doing these past 6 weeks. Tell him to ask her about the financial records, all of them, not just the ones she showed him. Her mind was working, fast and cold, the way it worked when something mattered enough. You have something on her, Nyla said. I have something that will matter very much to Minjun when he finds out. Sehun smoothed the front of his jacket. I'm giving him the opportunity to understand the full picture before things become public. He paused. Out of respect for an old acquaintance, she said nothing. She was thinking about Yeon-ji, a name she knew from Minjun's case updates, a face she had never seen, a professional whose competence Minjun had cited with the particular confidence of a man who trusted sparingly and therefore trusted absolutely when he did. You put her there, Nyla said slowly. Something moved in Sehun's eyes. 6 weeks ago, when Minjun started investigating, Yeonji didn't find him. He found her. She was watching Sehun's face the way she monitored vital signs, looking for the tell, the involuntary flicker. You put her in front of him. You knew he would investigate. You needed someone inside the investigation. The pleasantness on Sehun's face had gone very still. She had hit something real again. She could feel it the same way she had felt it on the phone call. The temperature drop, the thinning of the performance. What did she take? Nyla said. What did Yeonji give you? Tell Minjun to ask her, Sehun said quietly. The pleasantness was gone entirely now. Underneath it was something that had been waiting 17 years to be exactly this cold. Tell him to ask her about the documents she copied. Tell him to ask her who she was working for when she sat down with Oh Jae-sung this morning. A pause. And tell him that whatever goes to Han Jae-won today is already on my legal team's desk. We will challenge every piece of it. We will challenge the chain of custody, the source credibility, and the investigator's integrity. He stepped forward one step. Not threatening, too controlled for that, just closer. He has a choice, Dr. Brooks. Walk away from this. Take what's left of his case and use it however he wants privately. Or watch me burn the entire investigation from the inside out and take his most trusted colleague down with it. The maintenance room was cold. She could hear the building's pipes above her, the movement of water, the mechanical breath of a system that had no opinion about anything happening below it. She looked at Sehun and thought about 17 years old and letters that went nowhere, and a collision on a rain-slicked highway, and 11 seconds in a rehabilitation gym, and a man who had said, I'm not good at having things that matter to me that I can't control the perimeter of. You should have left it alone, she said. Her voice was very quiet. 13 years ago, and now, you should have left it alone. Sehun studied her. You're remarkably calm for someone in your position. I've been in worse positions. She held his eyes. And the people who put me in them didn't end up ahead. A silence. Then her phone was pressed into her hand by one of the men who had brought her here, and the door behind her was opened, and Sehun turned away with the gesture of a man closing a meeting. Give him my message, he said. She walked out through the service corridor, back up the stairwell, back into the hospital's ordinary light and noise and the smell of antiseptic and floor cleaner, and the specific mundane reality of a building full of people trying to get better. Taewon found her in the 8th-floor corridor 30 seconds later, moving toward her with the expression of someone who had spent the last 15 minutes in a controlled version of panic. "I'm fine," she said before he could speak. "Sir is—" "Call him. Tell him I'm fine and I need to speak with him immediately." She was already moving toward the elevator. "Tell him it's about Yeonji." Taewon's expression did something careful and specific. She looked at him. "What?" she said. I was quiet for 1 second. 1 second that had too much in it. "Mr. Jang called Yeonji 40 minutes ago to update her on the prosecutor meeting," Taewon said. "She didn't answer. We sent someone to her office." He paused. "She's gone, Dr. Brooks. Her computer has been wiped. Her files are cleared. She left the office sometime this morning and hasn't been back." The elevator arrived. The doors opened on an empty car. Nyla stood in the corridor and felt the shape of what Se-hoon had just done settle fully into place. Not a threat, not a negotiation, but a demonstration. A careful, precise, long-planned demonstration of exactly how deep inside Min-jun's operation he had managed to place his hands. Yeonji was gone, which meant the investigation was compromised from its foundation, which meant the recordings, the testimony, the financial documentation, all of it had passed through hands that had been reporting to the other side, which meant Se-hoon knew everything Min-jun had built, and Min-jun didn't know yet. She stepped into the elevator. She pressed the button for the 14th floor, and she thought, he is going to need to hear this from me, before he hears it any other way, before it has time to become something he can't come back from alone. The elevator descended. Min-gyun was in the lobby when the doors opened. Out of the wheelchair, standing with the parallel bar quality she recognized, Do-hyun 1 step behind him, 2 other men flanking the entrance. He had walked into the building. She registered that with a separate, small, fierce part of her attention, even as the rest of her focused on his face, on the expression she found there, which was the specific controlled stillness of a man who had already begun to understand that something had gone wrong and was waiting for the full picture. He looked at her. The assessment was immediate and thorough. Physical condition, emotional state, the specific quality of what she was carrying in her face. "Tell me," he said. She told him. She watched his face as she did it. She watched the stillness deepen, not into blankness, but into something that had specific weight and specific temperature, the way certain metals were cold to the touch because they conducted heat so efficiently that they pulled it directly from contact. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Around them, the hospital lobby moved. Visitors, staff, the ordinary human traffic of a building full of people with places to be. None of it touching the specific circle of stillness that had formed around the two of them and Do-hyun. 6 weeks, Min-jun said finally, quietly. "She was with us for 6 weeks. Yes, she found Jae-sung for me. She conducted the interview." His voice had gone to a register she hadn't heard from him before. Not anger, not grief, but something that was both and was older than either. The voice of a man who had trusted selectively and had just paid the exact price for the one miscalculation. She handed Se-hoon the recording. She handed him the financial chain. "Min-jun, the prosecutor has compromised evidence." He said it like a man cataloging damage. Systematic. Clinical in the way she was clinical, because sometimes the only way to look at something was to remove yourself from it long enough to see its true shape. Se-hoon's legal team will destroy the chain of custody. Jae-sung's testimony becomes insufficient without the corroborating investigation. He paused. "He walks." She said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would change the shape of what it was. "He took 13 years, Min-jun said, quiet, precise. "He tried to kill me. He put his hands inside the one thing I built to stop him." He looked at her. The controlled stillness had something in it now, something at the very edge of the composure, something she thought might actually break through if she was watching him in 20 minutes when he was alone. "And now he's standing there waiting to see what I do about it." She held his gaze. "What are you going to do about it?" He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she could see him deciding something, not impulsively, not reactively, but with the deliberate precision of a man making a choice about who he was going to be at the exact moment when who he was going to be would matter most. "Something I've never done before," he said. And before she could ask what that meant, Do-hyun's phone rang, and Do-hyun answered it, and the expression that crossed his face was the same one from the car 2 hours ago. the expression of information he would profoundly prefer not to deliver. Minjun looked at him. Jae-sung, Do-hyun said. He left the prosecutor's building an hour ago. They let him go pending formal charges. He paused. He was in a car accident on the way home. Another pause. He's alive, but he's in surgery. The lobby was very quiet around them. Si-hoon was removing the pieces, one by one, methodically, with the specific patience of someone who had been planning for longer than any of them had realized. Minjun turned toward the exit. Where are you going? Nyla said. He stopped, didn't turn around. To do the thing I said I wouldn't do, he said quietly. Mingun. She crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and put her hand on his arm. His forearm, the same place he had gripped her when he stood for 11 seconds. The same physical memory in both directions. Stop. He looked at her hand, then at her face. If you go do whatever you're about to do, she said, Se-hoon wins. Not because you'll fail, because you'll become exactly what he's been telling everyone you are. She held his gaze. And everything, the prosecutor, the case, any chance of this ending in a way that doesn't require you to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. It all goes with it. He was very still. There's another way, she said. There isn't. There is. There has to be. She kept her hand on his arm, kept her eyes on his. Give me 24 hours. Give me 24 hours before you do something that can't be undone. The lobby moved around them. Do-hyun stood 3 feet away, looking at nothing in particular with the specific focused attention of a man seeing nothing at all. Minjun looked at her for a long time. Then something in his face shifted. Not surrender, not defeat, but the specific, effortful choice of a man setting something down because the person in front of him has just become the most important thing in the room, and the most important thing in the room required him to 24 hours. Minjun gave her 24 hours the way a man gave away something he wasn't sure he could afford, with the specific, deliberate economy of someone who understood exactly what the currency was and what it cost. He said nothing else in the lobby. He looked at her hand on his arm for 1 more second, then he looked at her face, and then he turned around and walked, not wheeled, because sometime in the past 3 weeks walking had become his default, and the wheelchair had become the exception. And she noticed this the way she noticed everything about his recovery, with a professional satisfaction that was thoroughly tangled up with something else entirely, toward the exit. Do-hyun followed. Taewon materialized at her elbow. She stood in the lobby for a moment after they were gone and thought about 24 hours and what she was going to do with them. Then she went upstairs and made 3 phone calls. The first call was to Han Jae-won. The prosecutor answered on the second ring with the particular clipped efficiency of someone who had been expecting to hear from her. Dr. Brooks, she said, I was going to call you. Then you already know about Yeonji. A pause. I know that the investigator who conducted the Jae-sung interview has disappeared, and that there are questions about the integrity of the evidence chain. Han Jae-won's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Not panic, something more professional than panic. The specific quality of a case attorney watching the floor of a prosecution tilt. I also know that Kang Se-hoon's legal team filed a preemptive motion 2 hours ago, challenging the admissibility of the recorded evidence on grounds of compromised collection methodology. He moved before we could. Yes. A pause. Which means he knew what we had before we formally submitted it. Which means the investigation was compromised from inside, Nyla said. I know. That's why I'm calling. She was at her desk, the door closed, the city doing its flat gray afternoon thing outside the window. The recording Jae-sung provided, the device itself. Yeonji took it into the interview. She handed it to you. But Jae-sung brought it. He produced it from his own jacket. She paused. The chain of custody on the device itself doesn't run through Yeonji. It runs from Jae-sung directly to your office. Silence on the line. The investigation methodology is compromised, Nyla continued, but the primary evidence, the recording, and Jae-sung's direct testimony, those have a clean chain if you document it correctly. Yeonji facilitated the interview, but she didn't produce the evidence. Jae-sung did. More silence. The quality of it had changed, from the tilt of a floor giving way to something more like a person finding their footing. Jae-sung is in surgery, Han Jae-won said carefully. I know, but he's alive, and when he comes out, if Si-hoon's people got to him once, then he needs protection that doesn't run through any channel Si-hoon has access to. Nyla paused. Can you do that? A long silence. The financial documentation, Han Jae-won said. The debt settlement records, the shell company traces. Yeonji compiled those. Yes. But the original sources are public record and commercial databases. Everything she compiled can be independently reconstructed by your office directly. It takes longer, but it's clean. Nyla pressed her thumbnail against the edge of her desk. How long? 48 hours if I pull everyone I have onto it. A pause. 72 to be certain. Then you have 72 hours. I need you to tell me one thing. What? If Jae-sung survives and testifies, and you reconstruct the financial chain independently, and the recording device chain of custody holds, does the case hold? Han Jae-won was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that was a person being ruthlessly honest with themselves. Yes, she said finally, it holds. Then build it, Nyla said. I'll handle the rest. She hung up. The second call was to a number she had never expected to dial. It rang twice. Dr. Brooks, said Kang Se-hoon, surprised but covering it quickly with the pleasantness. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. I have a counter-proposal, she said. A pause. I'm listening. You want Min-jun to withdraw. I want to understand what that actually means to you. She kept her voice level, clinical, the voice she used when she was assessing something difficult. Because I don't think this is about the legal case. The legal case is a mechanism. What you actually want is something else. Silence. You've wanted the same thing since we were 17, she said. You wanted him to know that you could reach him, that his circle wasn't closed to you, that there was nowhere he was that you couldn't put your hands. She paused. The accident, Yeonji, all of it. It's not about destroying him. It's about making him see you. The silence on Si-hoon's end had a different quality now. She was in territory she wasn't certain about, reading a person she had known only at 17 and for 20 minutes in a cold maintenance room, and she was making assessments that could be wrong. But she didn't think they were wrong. What's your proposal? Se-hoon said. His voice had changed register, barely, but she caught it. Meet with him, she said. Not through intermediaries, not in a maintenance room, directly. Tomorrow morning. She paused. Let him look at you and say whatever he's going to say, and then let this end. Let the case proceed. Accept whatever comes from it. Another pause. Because the alternative is that this continues escalating until someone dies. And Se-hoon, we both know who that someone is most likely to be. And it isn't Min-jun. The line was very quiet. You're asking me to walk into an execution, Si-hoon said. I'm asking you to walk into a conversation. She exhaled. With someone who, despite everything you've done, has spent the last 6 weeks choosing the legal path specifically because he didn't want to be what you've decided he is. A long silence. Tomorrow, Se-hoon said slowly. Where? She told him. She hung up. She sat at her desk for a moment and thought about whether what she had just done was extraordinarily brave or profoundly stupid, and decided the distinction was possibly academic. Then she made the third call. What? Min-gun picked up on the first ring. I need you to meet someone tomorrow morning, she said. A beat. Who? Se-hoon. The silence that followed was the loudest silence she had heard from him yet. Nyla, I know what you're thinking. Hear me out. She told him everything. Han Jae-won, the evidence chain, the 72 hours, the reconstruction. She told him about the call to Se-hoon and what she had said and what Se-hoon had answered. She told him all of it in the flat, precise sequence she used for clinical briefings. Because if she let herself think too hard about the fact that she had just arranged a meeting between a mafia boss and the man who had tried to kill him, she would lose the steadiness she needed to finish the sentence. When she was done, Min-jun was quiet for a very long time. You called him, Min-jun said. Yes. You called the man who had you walked into a maintenance room this morning and threatened you. I called the man who has been making decisions based on incomplete information for 17 years, she said. And I gave him complete information. That's not... He stopped. She could hear him breathing. That is an extraordinarily dangerous thing you did. I know. If he decides the meeting is a liability, he won't. He agreed too quickly. She paused. He wants to be in the room with you. He has always wanted to be in the room with you. That's the thing I said to him that landed. She paused again. Was I wrong? A silence. No, Min-jun said quietly. You weren't wrong. Then come tomorrow. Let me be there. Absolutely not. Minjun, you have done enough. His voice had gone to something she hadn't heard from him before. Not cold, not commanding, but something rawer than either. Something that had the quality of a person whose composure was doing its hardest work of the week. You have done more than enough. You are not going to be in that room. She thought about arguing. She thought about the specific architecture of his stubbornness, and about what was underneath what he had just said. Not control, not possessiveness, but fear. The clean, human, undisguised fear of a man who had been without the thing that mattered most for 13 years and was not, under any circumstances, going to risk it again. All right, she said quietly. A beat. All right, he said, like he hadn't expected it. All right, she paused. But you call me the minute it's over. The minute. Not when it's convenient. Not when you've finished processing. The minute. Another beat. Longer. Yes, he said. The meeting happened at 7 the next morning in a private room above the same Mapo restaurant. Minjun walked in without the wheelchair. Without Do-hyun inside the room, though Do-hyun was outside the door, and the building's perimeter was covered in a way that Se-hoon's people were almost certainly aware of, and that Se-hoon had come anyway, which told Minjun something. Se-hoon was already seated. He stood when Minjun entered, which was either courtesy or the instinct of someone who needed to not be sitting when a specific person walked through the door. They looked at each other. 17 years of everything between them in a room that smelled of old wood and tea and the particular early morning quality of a city that had been running all night. You walked in, Se-hoon said. Yes, Minjun said. He sat down. Se-hoon sat down. The room was very quiet. The accident, Minjun said. No preamble. Tell me why. Se-hoon was quiet for a moment. He looked like a man who had prepared for a different opening and was revising in real time. The business reasons are— I don't want the business reasons. Minjun's voice was flat. I want the real reason. A silence. Se-hoon looked at the table, then at Minjun, and something happened on his face that Minjun had never seen from him before in 17 years. Something that was not pleasantness, not strategy, not the performance of a man who had been performing his entire life. Something underneath all of that, briefly visible. You were untouchable, Se-hoon said quietly. You were always untouchable. From the first year at Hansung, you walked in and the entire school reorganized itself around you without you asking it to, without you caring whether it did or not. His voice was level, but there was something moving under it. I had everything. My father's name, the money, the connections, and none of it made anyone look at me the way they looked at you. Minjun said nothing. And then she came, Se-hoon said. That black girl from America, who was supposed to be invisible and instead became— He stopped. She became the one person you actually looked at. The room was very still. So you took her, Minjun said quietly. I made sure she couldn't stay in contact. Se-hoon's voice was flat now. Confessional in the specific way of someone who has been carrying something long enough that the carrying has become more exhausting than the telling. Her mother's address was in the school records. Calls from a Baltimore area code to your family's number. I had someone intercept them. He paused. I told myself it was business, that you would be distracted without her, that you'd be easier to— He stopped. To what? Minjun said. To be better than. Se-hoon said it like he was putting something down on a table that had been in his hands for 17 years. To finally be better than. Minjun looked at him for a long time. Did it work? He said. The silence that followed answered the question completely. Minjun sat back in his chair. He was aware of his own heartbeat, steady, slower than the situation arguably warranted. The heart of a man who had spent 3 months rebuilding his body from a near-complete stop, and had learned in that process something specific about what endurance actually required. The case proceeds, he said. I'm not withdrawing. Han Jae-won has what she needs, and she's going to finish building it. He paused. I'm not going to tell you what to do about that. Se-hoon looked at him. But I'm also not going to do what I came here very close to doing yesterday, Minjun said. Which is the only concession I'm making, not for you. He paused. For someone else. A long silence. Jae-sung, Se-hoon said, and Sung-chul. Neither of them was touched on my order, Minjun said. His voice had the specific quality of a man telling the truth, that he knows will not be believed and has decided to tell it anyway. If your people did that to cover your exposure, that's on your account, not mine. Something moved across Sehun's face. They weren't mine, he said. Minjun went very still. Sehun's eyes held his. I made one call, to a broker. I didn't specify methods, and I didn't authorize. He stopped. His jaw worked. It got out of my control. A broker, Minjun said quietly. Who? A man Wu Chil Sung. He operates out of... I know who he is, Minjun said. His voice had gone to a register that Du Hyun, outside the door, would have recognized immediately. He took a contract I didn't sanction, and he went further than the person who hired him authorized. Yes, which means he's a problem for both of us. Sehun was quiet. You hired him, Minjun said. That makes you responsible for what he did, legally and otherwise. I need you to understand that. He paused. But Wu Chil-sung operating outside the terms of a contract in this city is a separate issue that I will deal with separately. And me? Sehun said. Minjun looked at him for a long time. The case proceeds, he said again. Whatever Han Jae-won builds, it goes where it goes. I'm not protecting you from that, and I'm not accelerating it. He stood, slowly. The standing still cost him something. She had told him it always would, that full recovery was months away yet, that the parallel bars and 11 seconds in a gym were the beginning, not the end. But he stood completely, and he looked down at Sehun with 17 years of everything in his face and none of it showing except in the particular quality of his eyes. But if anything touches her again, the legal case becomes the least of your concerns. He said it the way he had said everything that was simply true. No heat, no performance, just the fact of it, laid on the table like a stone. Sehun did not look away, did not argue, did not deploy the pleasantness. He nodded once. Minjun walked out. Du Hyun was waiting in the corridor with the expression of a man who had spent the last 40 minutes being very professionally calm. Report, Minjun said. Wu Chil-sung, Du Hyun said immediately, which told Minjun that Du Hyun had been piecing this together independently. He's been operating in the Yongsan district. He took Sehun's contract, but he's been running additional plays on the side. Sung Chul and Jae Sung were warnings, not eliminations. He's trying to create leverage. Over who? Over whoever pays more. Du Hyun paused. He made a call this morning. To someone in your organization. Minjun stopped walking. Who? He said quietly. Du Hyun told him. The name landed with the specific quality of information that restructured the context around it. Not a small name, not a peripheral name, but a name that sat near the center of Minjun's operation in a specific and trusted capacity. He processed this for 3 seconds. Find him, Minjun said, before Wu does. Already moving. Du Hyun hesitated 1 beat. And Wu? Minjun was already walking toward the exit, toward the gray morning and the car and the phone call he had promised to make. Wu Chil-sung, he said, is going to have a very specific kind of day. He pushed through the door into the morning air. Seoul was waking up around him. The city's morning sounds. The Han River somewhere behind the buildings. The sky, the same flat gray it had been for 3 days, holding its breath. He pulled out his phone. She answered before the first ring finished. It's done, he said. A pause. He could hear her breathing. The specific quality of someone who had been holding something together very carefully and was now carefully setting it down. Are you all right? She said. He stood on the pavement outside the restaurant and looked at the street and thought about the question, about what all right meant in the specific context of his life, which was a context that did not naturally produce straightforward answers. Come to the hospital, she said, before he could answer. Your session today is at 2, but come now. Come for... She stopped. He could hear her making a decision. Come because I want to see you, and I'm done pretending that's not a clinical reason. Something happened in his chest. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. 15, she said. You have a driver. He got in the car. Du Hyun was already on the phone, already managing the 3 separate urgent things that required managing. The ordinary operational reality of Minjun's world continuing to run around the specific gravity of this morning. Minjun looked out the window at Seoul moving past. A woman with an umbrella. Though it wasn't raining yet, a street vendor setting up, 2 kids in school uniforms arguing about something with the complete investment of people for whom the argument is the most important thing happening anywhere. His phone buzzed. A text from Han Jae-won. Jae Sung out of surgery. Stable. I've placed my own people with him. We proceed. He forwarded it to Nyla without comment. 3 seconds later, she sent back a single word. Good. Then after a pause, 15 minutes. He looked out the window. The car moved through Seoul, and Minjun thought about what Nyla had done in the past 24 hours. The calls she had made, the moves she had calculated, the conversation she had walked into a maintenance room already thinking 3 steps ahead of the man who thought he had put her on the back foot. He thought about Se-hoon's face when something real had broken through the performance. He thought about Woo Chil-sung and the name Do-hyun had just given him, and the specific, careful, inevitable work that was going to be required in the next 48 hours to close every open thread before any of them became something worse. I thought about all of this, and underneath all of this, running like a current under a river's surface, he thought about a rehabilitation gym in 11 seconds and a woman who had spent 13 years in the specific silence he had built around her absence and had come back through a hospital intake form, and had proceeded in the 3 months since to dismantle every careful structure he had built to function without her. She had done it by being exactly who she had always been. That was the thing that got him. Not the strategy, not the phone calls, not the 24 hours she had bought with nothing except her own specific, stubborn, empirical insistence that people were more than the worst version of their situation. The thing that got him was that he had told her, at 17, that she was the clearest thing he had ever encountered in a world that was mostly noise. And 13 years and a collision, and a wheelchair, and a rehabilitation gym, and all of this, and she was still that, still exactly that. The hospital came into view through the windshield. He checked his phone. 14 minutes. He looked at Do-hyun. When the Woo situation is handled, he said, and when the case closes, I need you to clear my schedule. Do-hyun looked at him in the rearview mirror. For how long? Minjun thought about it. A while, he said. Do-hyun's expression did something that on a different face might have been a smile. Understood, he said. The car pulled up to the hospital entrance. Minjun got out. He walked through the automatic doors into the lobby. Walking, no chair, the recovery that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. Now simply the ordinary fact of moving through a building. His back carried a constant low-grade ache that she had told him would decrease over the next 6 months, and that he had learned to treat as information rather than obstacle. He took the elevator to the 14th floor. She was waiting in the corridor outside the rehabilitation gym. Not in the gym, not in her office, in the corridor, which meant she had been watching for the elevator. She was in her white coat, hair close-cropped, stethoscope around her neck, all the ordinary equipment of her ordinary professional day. She looked exactly like herself. He walked toward her. She watched him walking and said nothing for a moment. 15 minutes, she said. 14. She looked at him. Her eyes moved across his face the way they moved across his chart at the start of every session, assessing, cataloging, deciding. Except that this assessment was not clinical, and they both knew it, and neither of them was pretending otherwise. Se-hoon, she said. The case proceeds. He knows it. He's not going to run. He paused. There's another problem. Woo Chil-sung. I'll explain it fully later. Do-hyun is handling the immediate piece. She nodded, processing. Jae-sung. Stable. Han Jae-won has him. Then it holds. It holds. He looked at her. What you did yesterday. The calls, the framework for the evidence chain. Han Jae-won would not have seen that path without you. She would have found it, Nyla said. Eventually. Maybe, but you found it in 2 hours. He held her gaze. You saved the case. She looked at the corridor floor for a moment, then back at him. I saved it because I needed it saved, she said. I have a vested interest in this ending cleanly. She paused. In you being able to close this and be... She stopped. Finished with it, he said. Yes. He looked at her. At the corridor. At the flat gray soul light coming through the windows at the far end of the hall. I'm not finished with all of it, he said quietly. I don't think I'm ever going to be finished with all of it. That's not... He paused. That's not what my life is. I know what your life is. And? She looked at him steadily. The assessment had completed, and whatever conclusion it had reached was in her eyes. Complex, specific, arrived at through evidence rather than sentiment, which was the only way she arrived at conclusions, and which was also, he had always thought, the most trustworthy kind. And I'm a rehabilitation specialist, she said. I know how to work with what's actually there, she paused. Not what I wish were there. He held her gaze. In the rehabilitation gym behind them, someone was running a session. The counting of reps, the creak of equipment, the encouraging bark of a technician. Life in its ordinary channels. After the program ends, he said. After the program ends, she confirmed. That's 6 sessions. 5 now that you're walking on your own. He looked at her. She looked at him. 4, she said, if your Thursday numbers hold. Something almost happened on his face. The same something that had almost happened before, across 3 months of sessions and 11 seconds in corridor pauses and phone calls at the edge of darkness. This time it did happen. It lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. A message from Do Hyun. Woo Chil Sung. We have a location. He's moving. The moment shifted. Not broke. Shifted. The way a current changed direction without stopping. Go, she said. Nyla, go do what you need to do. She held his gaze. And then come back. He looked at her for one more second. Something clean and certain in his face. Not the composure that held things in, but the composure that had nothing it needed to hold anymore because the most important thing was already said. I'll come back, he said. He turned toward the elevator. He was 3 steps away when she said his name. He stopped. Minjun. Her voice had changed. He turned. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen from her before. Not clinical, not strategic, not the careful professional distance she had been maintaining with such deliberate effort for 3 months. Something more open than any of that. Something that had the quality of a person who had decided to stop calculating the cost of a thing and simply say it. Come back in one piece, she said. That's not a clinical instruction. He held her gaze. Understood, he said. He got in the elevator, the doors closed. Do Hyun was already on the phone with directions to a location in Yongsan, where Woo Chil Sung was currently moving towards something that Min Jun's people were still working to identify, but that had the specific shape, from the phone call Do Hyun had intercepted, from the name he had given Min Jun in the car, of a man trying to tie off the last loose end before the city closed in around him. The loose end had a name, and the loose end was someone Min Jun had trusted. The car moved through Seoul in the flat gray morning, and Min Jun sat with his hands on his knees and his phone screen showing Do Hyun's real-time updates, and thought about what came next. Not with dread, not with rage, but with the specific focused clarity of a man who had rebuilt himself from the cellular level up and knew now exactly what he was capable of and exactly what he was capable of choosing. He thought about the word she had used. Come back. Not be careful. Not good luck. Not any of the forms of distance that careful people used when they were afraid of what they meant. Come back. 2 words. He was going to hold them for the rest of the day, and he was going to do what needed doing, and then he was going to come back, and they were going to have a conversation that had been 13 years in the making, and he was going to be present for every second of it. The car turned onto the expressway. Below, the Han River caught a brief break in the overcast sky, 1 bar of pale light across the gray water, there and then gone as the clouds closed back over it. Minjun looked at it as they crossed the bridge. Then he looked at Do Hyun. Tell me exactly where he is, he said. And Do Hyun told him, and the city moved beneath them. And somewhere in Yongsan, a man named Woo Chil Sung was about to discover that the specific variety of miscalculation he had made, operating outside sanctioned parameters, taking contracts that created chaos in a city where chaos had an owner, had a consequence that arrived quietly, without warning. And Woo Chil Sung was found in a parking structure in Yongsan at 10:47 in the morning, 3 levels underground, in the specific kind of place that people chose when they needed to have conversations that the city's surface didn't accommodate. He was not alone. The man with him was named Lim Byung-tae, and he had worked in Min Jun's financial operations for 6 years, and his presence in that parking structure at that specific time confirmed everything Do Hyun had told Min Jun in the car. Byung-tae had been Yeonji's contact inside Min Jun's organization, the thread that Si-hoon's operation had cultivated slowly and quietly over 2 years, feeding small pieces of information outward, building toward the moment when the thread would matter most. The moment had been the investigation. Byung-tae had known everything. Yeonji knew, because Yeonji had needed an inside source to make her access look natural, and Byung-tae had provided it, and Woo Chil-sung had been managing both of them as a consolidated asset, which was efficient and which was also, Minjun noted as he stepped out of the car into the parking structure's cold concrete air, the kind of efficiency that only worked until the person at the center of the network decided to look at the shape of it. Woo Chil-sung was 53 years old, compact, with the weathered quality of a man who had operated in the city's shadows long enough that the shadows had worked their way into his face. He looked at Minjun across the parking structure with the expression of a man who had made calculations and understood they had not held. Byung-tae looked at Minjun with the expression of a man who had not fully believed this moment would arrive until it did. Minjun looked at Byung-tae for a long moment. 6 years. The man had been in rooms where things were said that mattered, had been trusted with the kind of information that required trust, because there was no other mechanism for it, had sat across tables and eaten meals and been, not a friend, Minjun did not use that word loosely, but someone whose presence in the organization had been taken as settled. Why? Minjun said. One word. Not angry, not cold. Just the question. Byung-tae looked at the concrete floor. The money, he said. And then, after a pause, with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been maintaining a lie for long enough that the truth has become a relief. And because I was afraid of you. And being afraid of you for 6 years it costs something. Si-hoon's people were kind to me. Minjun absorbed this. They were kind to you, he said. Yes. And Sung-chul in the hospital, Minjun said. Jae-sung in surgery. Byung-tae's jaw tightened. I didn't know he would go that far. But you knew he was capable of it. No answer. Minjun looked at Woo Chil-sung. The contracts on Sung-chul and Jae-sung, he said, those were your initiative. Woo met his eyes. He had the quality of a man who had decided, arriving at this moment, that performance was a waste of the time he had left. Damage control. Si-hoon's operation was collapsing. Loose ends create exposure. They're alive, Minjun said. Yes. Woo's voice was flat. I was managing the situation, not eliminating it. Managing it toward what? Toward a negotiating position. Woo looked at him steadily. With you, directly. Which is where we are. Mingun was quiet for a moment. Around them, the parking structure held its cold, concrete silence. Do-hyun was 3 feet to Minjun's left. 2 other men were positioned at the structure's entry points. Woo's own people, there had been 2 of them, were no longer a functional variable. There's no negotiation, Minjun said. You took unsanctioned contracts in this city. You created collateral damage involving people outside your operational scope. You ran an asset inside my organization for 2 years. He paused. That's 3 separate lines. I don't negotiate across any of them. Woo studied him. Then what are we doing here? I'm giving you the opportunity to tell me everything, Minjun said. Every detail of the operation, every contact, every piece of information that moved through Byung-tae and Yeonji and anyone else you were running, complete and accurate. He held Woo's gaze. Because Han Jae-won is going to receive a comprehensive file in the next 48 hours, and the quality of what's in that file is going to determine the shape of what comes next for you. A silence. You're going to the prosecutor, Woo said, less question than confirmation. For everything connected to Si-hoon's operation, which includes you. Minjun's voice was level. This city does not need another body in a parking structure. It needs a case that closes. Woo looked at him for a long moment. The calculation was visible. Not the pretense of calculation, but the actual thing. A man genuinely working through the coordinates of his position and finding them limited. All right, Woo said. It took 2 hours. Do-hyun recorded everything. By the time they emerged from the parking structure into the flat gray Seoul morning, Minjun had a complete picture. The full architecture of Si-hoon's operation, the financial flows, the names, the timeline going back 4 years to when Se-hoon had first begun positioning assets against Minjun's organization with the long, patient strategy of a man who had been planning not a single strike, but a systematic dismantling. In the car on the way to Han Jae-won's office, Minjun sent Nyla one text. Coming back. 1 hour. Her response came in 40 seconds. I'll be here. Han Jae-won received the file at 2 in the afternoon. She read through it with the focused, surgical attention that Minjun had come to recognize as her working mode, asking 3 precise questions. making notes on a yellow pad that she covered with her forearm when she wasn't writing, and at the end she set the pad down and looked at him across her desk with the expression of a woman recalibrating a significant number of her prior assumptions. This closes Sehun, she said. Yes. It also opens questions about your own operation that I'm going to be obligated to. I know, Minjun said. I expect that. Handle it how you need to handle it. She looked at him. You understand what you're handing me. I understand what I'm choosing. He held her gaze. Some things are worth the cost. Han Jae-won was quiet for a moment. She looked at the file, at the yellow pad, at the window behind Minjun's head, where Seoul was doing its late afternoon compression toward evening, the light going amber and thin. Kang Se-hoon will be arrested by end of week, she said. The attempted murder charge is the primary count. The financial fraud, the conspiracy, those follow. She paused. With the recording, Jae-sung's testimony, and Woo's full deposition, the defense has nothing to work with. And the exposure to my operation? I'll be as surgical as the evidence allows. She met his eyes. It was not a promise. It was the closest thing to one that her professional integrity would permit, and he understood that and respected it. That's all I can give you. That's enough, he said. He stood to leave. At the door she said, Minjun. He turned. She looked at him for a moment. Han Jae-won, who had made it clear at their first meeting that she was not his ally, and had spent the years since demonstrating it with consistent professional rigor. Whatever you did to get here, she said, the way you got here, it mattered. He held her gaze. Then he walked out. He got to the hospital at 4:15. She was in her office, coat off, the end-of-day organized chaos of her desk in full effect, files stacked in the specific patterns that she apparently understood, and that had always looked to him like the aftermath of an event. She was writing something when he knocked on the open door and she looked up, and something in her face did the thing it had started doing 3 months ago that she had stopped trying to manage. Sit down, she said. He sat. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Outside, the Han River had gone gold in the late afternoon light, the sun finally breaking through the flat gray overcast it had maintained for 3 days, arriving at this specific hour with the casual indifference of a city that did not organize its beauty around human schedules. Is it done? She said. Han Jae-won has everything. Si-hoon will be arrested this week. He looked at his hands. Woo Chil-sung is in custody. Byung-tae. He paused. He cooperated fully. That will be reflected in how the case handles him. And you? He looked up. There will be exposure, he said. Han Jae-won will be as careful as her job allows. But some things will surface. He held her gaze. I knew that going in. I chose it anyway. She looked at him steadily. I know you did. It may complicate things, he said. For you, association, your position here, Minjun. Her voice was quiet, but there was something solid in it. I survived leukemia twice. I built a career from a hospital bed in Baltimore. I came back to a city I left at 17, and I walked into a room with a man who looked at me like I had personally betrayed him, and I did not run. She held his gaze. I'm not going to run from this either. He looked at her. The office was very quiet. The gold light from the river moved slightly as a cloud caught part of it, shifted, released it. I need to tell you something, he said. All right. When Do-hyun told me your phone wasn't answering yesterday morning, he said slowly, when he told me you'd gone down for a consult and hadn't come back, he stopped. His jaw worked briefly. I have run operations in this city for 15 years. I have been in rooms with people who intended me serious harm, and I have never... He stopped again. I have never moved the way I moved yesterday morning. She was very still. I need you to know that, he said, not because I'm asking anything from it, because you should know what you are to me, what you have been. He paused. What you have always been, even when I spent years trying to convince myself otherwise. The river light held them both in it. Minjun, she said, I know the program ends next week. It ends Thursday, she said, your final session. And after Thursday? After Thursday, she said, you're not my patient anymore. He looked at her. She looked at him. Friday, she said, there's a restaurant in Seongdong that I've been wanting to try for 2 months, and I've been going alone to restaurants for too many years, and I would like to not do that on Friday. Something happened on his face, complete and unguarded, lasting longer than 2 seconds this time. lasting long enough that she could see all of it, the relief and the humor and the specific quality of a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had just been told he could set it down. Friday, he said. 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up at 6:45. I said 7. 6:45, he said. I'll wait outside. She looked at him. The professional distance she had maintained for 3 months was entirely gone, and neither of them was pretending otherwise. And the office felt both smaller and larger than it had at any point in the past 3 months. All right, she said. 6:45. Kong Se-hoon was arrested on a Thursday morning, 6 days after Han Jae-won received the complete file. The arrest happened at his office in Gangnam. 2 prosecutors, 4 officers, and the specific quiet efficiency of a legal apparatus that had been thoroughly and carefully loaded before it was aimed. Se-hoon walked out of his building in handcuffs at 9:15 in the morning, and the photographs appeared online within the hour. And by afternoon, the national news had the full framework of the charges: attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, fraudulent financial operations spanning 4 years. Min-jun saw the news on his phone. He was in the rehabilitation gym at the time, running himself through the end-of-program assessment that Nyla had scheduled for his final official session. She was making notes on her chart. The gym was the same padded floors, same ceiling rails, same amber afternoon light that had been the backdrop to 3 months of work that had started in a wheelchair and arrived here. He put the phone away. Done? She said, not looking up from the chart. Yes. She looked up, read his face the way she had learned to read it. How do you feel? He thought about it. Like something has been resolved. That's accurate. She made a final note. Clinically, your recovery is at 83% of pre-injury mobility baseline. Your pain levels have stabilized at a 2 on average, which is consistent with the long-term prognosis for your injury type. She looked at him. You'll need maintenance sessions. I'd recommend monthly for the first year. I can refer you to a colleague. I'd rather keep coming here. You're no longer my patient after today. I know. He held her gaze. I'd still rather come here. She looked at him for a moment. Monthly, she said. First Tuesday. First Tuesday, he confirmed. She closed the chart. They stood in the rehabilitation gym in the amber light, with 3 months of Tuesday and Thursday afternoons behind them, and whatever was ahead of them, and the city ran its quiet noise outside the windows, and Nyla Brooks looked at Jang Min-jun with the specific expression of a woman who had learned, in the hardest possible ways, to take nothing for granted and to value accordingly. I looked at your intake form again this morning, she said. The first one. From 3 months ago. He waited. The occupation field was blank, she said. I noticed that the first day. I remember. I spent 3 months treating you as my patient, she said. I know what you are. I know the shape of your life. I know it's complicated, and I know it carries cost, and I know there is nothing clean about it. She paused. I'm not asking for clean. What are you asking for? He said quietly. Honest, she said. That's all. Whatever it is, honest. He looked at her for a long moment. That I can do, he said. She nodded. Once. The decisive, conclusive nod of a clinical assessment completed. Good, she said. 6:45 tomorrow. The seasons changed. Not quickly. Not in the cinematic way that time moved in stories. It moved the way it actually moved, with the specific, grinding, ordinary weight of one day following another until enough of them had accumulated to constitute something. They went to the restaurant in Seongdong on Friday. He picked her up at 6:42, which she pointed out, and which he declined to apologize for. They ate for 3 hours and talked the way people talked who had known each other at 17 and were learning each other at 34 and 35, not filling in gaps so much as discovering that the gaps had content they hadn't anticipated. He told her things about the years between that he had not previously told anyone. She told him things about Baltimore and the treatment centers and the specific quality of surviving something that is supposed to kill you and the strange, disorienting gift of time that follows. They walked along the river afterward. Seoul around them in the evening, doing its enduring thing. She took his hand somewhere along the Seongdong waterfront, not dramatically, not as a moment, just the ordinary fact of 2 people walking together and one of them reaching sideways, and he closed his hand around hers with the same quality he brought to everything that mattered, completely, without reservation. Oh Jae-sung recovered. He testified in Han Jae-won's prosecution for 4 hours over 2 days, and his testimony, combined with Woo's deposition and the reconstructed financial documentation and the recording that had survived its chain of custody challenges, built a case that Si-hoon's legal team spent 6 months attacking and failed to dismantle. The verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring. Attempted murder. Conspiracy. 12 years. Min-jun heard the verdict from Do-hyun. I was at Nyla's apartment at the time, sitting at her kitchen table with a coffee he had made himself because he had learned where things were in her kitchen over the months of Friday evenings and Saturday mornings that had accumulated into the texture of a shared life. He read the text and set the phone face down on the table. Nyla was at the counter with her own coffee, reading something on her tablet. 12 years, he said. She set the tablet down, looked at him. Is that enough? She said. He thought about it. About 13 years of letters that went nowhere, and a rain-slicked highway, and a wheelchair, and 3 months in a rehabilitation gym, and the specific weight of all the time between then and this kitchen on a Tuesday in early spring. It has to be, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she crossed the kitchen and sat down across from him at the table and put both hands flat on the surface, and he put one of his over hers, and they sat in the ordinary morning light of the apartment with Seoul outside the window doing its indifferent, enduring thing. Park Sung-chul recovered from his injuries and cooperated with the prosecution. Lim Byung-tae received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony and left the city when he was released, which was the expected and acceptable outcome. Woo Chil-sung's prosecution ran separately through a different division of Han Jae-won's office and concluded 18 months later with a result that was legally clean and publicly unremarkable and final. The exposure to Min-jun's own operation, the surgical exposure that Han Jae-won had promised and delivered, resulted in a 14-month period of significant operational disruption and 3 specific areas of accountability that Min-jun navigated with the methodical, clear-eyed focus of a man who had decided to pay what he owed and who understood that paying it did not make the debt romantic or the process easy. It was expensive. It was unglamorous. It was the actual cost of the actual choices, and he paid it without asking for credit. During those 14 months, Nyla went to every difficult meeting he had to attend. Not in the room. Never in the room. Because she was not naive about what her presence implied or what it could complicate, but in the car before, on the phone after, at the kitchen table at midnight with coffee and the specific quality of attention that said, I am here. Whatever this costs, I am here. He noticed this every time. He never took it for granted. They married in autumn, 2 years after Min-jun had rolled a wheelchair into Nyla's office and said 4 words that cut to the bone. It was small, deliberately small. A room in a restaurant they both liked, 23 people, her family flown in from the States, and his family present in the particular complicated way that his family's presence was always complicated, and that Nyla had long since learned to navigate with the same empirical directness she brought to everything. Her younger sister, who had been her bone marrow donor 13 years ago, sat in the front row and cried with the unashamed completeness of someone who had earned the right to those tears. Do-hyun, who had worked for Min-jun for 11 years by then, and who had been in the car outside the Mapo restaurant and in the parking structure in Yongsan, and who had spent those 11 years being impeccably professional at all times, excused himself to the corridor during the vows and came back with red eyes and the expression of a man who would deny this if asked. The vows were short, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that needed to be said had already been said. In a rehabilitation gym and on a Seongdong waterfront and at a kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in early spring. What was left was the formal acknowledgement of something that had already been true for long enough that the ceremony felt like documentation rather than declaration. When he kissed her, her younger sister started crying again. Nyla laughed. Min-gun held her face in both hands and looked at her with the expression of a man who had spent 13 years in the specific silence of a thing he thought was gone, and was currently, in this moment, receiving confirmation that it was not gone and had never been gone, and was in fact standing right here. You're crying, she said very quietly. No, I'm not. She put her thumb against his cheekbone. He was. He let it stand. The years that followed were not perfect. They were not the curated, airbrushed version of a life built after difficulty. They were actual years, with actual friction and actual cost, and the specific, ongoing, non-negotiable work of 2 people with strong, independent selves, choosing each other over and over in the ordinary circumstances that movies didn't bother to show because the ordinary circumstances were too quiet for cameras. His work remained complicated. It changed shape over the years, slowly, imperfectly, in the grinding way that real things changed rather than the clean way that stories preferred. He was not a different person. He was the same person making different choices with the increasing clarity of a man who had identified what he was willing to pay for and what he was not. Nyla kept her practice. She was named department director at Seohan Medical Center 4 years after their marriage, which was overdue, and which she accepted with the pragmatic satisfaction of someone who had been doing the director's job since the second year without the title. She built a research program. She trained residents. She was by any clinical or professional measure exceptionally good at the work she had chosen, and she brought to it the specific quality that she brought to everything: empirical, direct, capable of sitting with difficulty without flinching from it. They had children. 2. A daughter first, then a son. The daughter had Nyla's eyes and Minjun's jaw, and a personality that arrived in the world with such fully formed, unapologetic authority that Minjun, at 3 months, told Nyla she's going to terrify everyone. To which Nyla had replied, "Good." The son was quieter, watchful, precise, with his father's quality of occupying a room completely without requiring the room to acknowledge it. They were different from each other, and both entirely themselves and both, in their separate ways, the most important people their parents had ever known. Minjun was present in ways his own father had not been. This was not incidental. It was a specific, daily, deliberate choice made against the grain of his formation, and it cost him something ongoing, and he paid it without accounting for it out loud, which Nyla noticed, and which the children absorbed without knowing they were absorbing it. On a Thursday evening in December, 13 years after they had married, Nyla came home from the hospital later than usual. Minjun was in the kitchen. The children were grown, the daughter finishing her second year of medical school in Boston, the son doing something in urban planning that Minjun did not entirely understand but supported without qualification. The house was quiet, in the way it had been quiet when it was full of children and was now quiet differently, the quiet of a space that had held a great deal of life and retained the shape of it. She sat down at the kitchen table. He looked at her. In 31 years of knowing her, at 17 in a school corridor, at 34 in an intake office, through everything between and after, he had learned to read the specific quality of her silences with the same precision she had learned to read the tension around his eyes. He set down the dish he was drying and sat across from her. "Tell me," he said. She looked at the table, then at him. "The scan," she said, "from last month, the follow-up." He was very still. "They found something," she said. The kitchen held the sound of the building, the radiator, the distant texture of the city outside. "How serious?" he said. They don't know yet." Her voice was steady. The specific steadiness of a person who had trained their voice to be steady in clinical situations and was currently experiencing the particular difficulty of being on the wrong side of the clinical situation. "There are more tests. Next week." She looked at her hands. "It may be nothing. And if it isn't nothing?" She looked up at him. He was looking at her the way he had always looked at her, completely, without the social performance of looking away, with the specific quality of attention that had no exit strategy and was not looking for one. "Then we handle it," she said. "Yes," he said. "We do." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. His hands were older now, 50 years old, the hands of a man who had rebuilt a body and built a life, and carried the accumulated physical reality of both. Her hands were the same, older, the hands of a surgeon and a mother and a person who had survived the unsurvivable twice already, and knew, therefore, something specific about what survival required. "Minjun," she said. "I know," he said. "Whatever it is, I know," he said again, quiet, absolute. "Whatever it is." She turned her hand over and held his. Outside the kitchen window, Seoul was doing what Seoul always did, running its 10 million lives in their 10 million directions, indifferent and enduring and entirely unaware of two people at a kitchen table in Seongdong who had found each other at 17 and lost each other and found each other again and had spent the years since building something out of all of it that was real and imperfect and entirely theirs. The tests came back the following week. Not nothing. A finding that required attention, treatment, the specific machinery of modern medicine, engaging once more with a body that had been through it before. It was serious. It was not unsurvivable. It took 2 years and significant cost of the kind that could not be measured in any unit, except the way a person's face looked at midnight after a hard day, and Minjun was there for every midnight without exception. When it was over, when the clearance came and the exhaustion began to lift, and the particular thin, clear quality of recovered life began to return to her face, he found her one morning sitting on the apartment balcony with coffee, looking at the Han River in the early light. He sat beside her. They didn't speak for a while. The river below was silver and quiet. The city was still in its early morning way, holding its breath before the day began. "You should have run," she said eventually. Not serious. The specific tone of someone speaking a thing they don't believe in order to hear it contradicted. "From what?" he said. She gestured loosely at herself. "At everything. At the accumulated, complicated human fact of 13 years of marriage and 2 rounds of illness, and a life that had been, by any measure, significantly more difficult than average." He looked at her. "I spent 13 years running," he said. "Not from you. From the fact that you were gone. It was the same thing." He picked up his coffee. "I'm done running from things." She looked at the river. "That's a good policy," she said. "I learned it from my rehabilitation doctor," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. She laughed. The real laugh. The one that had no performance in it. The one that had taken him years to produce reliably, and that he valued, therefore, in exact proportion to its rarity. He thought, this is the thing. Not the power or the city or the 15 years of operations or the verdict in a courtroom on a Tuesday in early spring. Not the 11 seconds in a rehabilitation gym, or the parallel bars, or the first time he had walked out of a building under his own power and felt the specific, unremarkable miracle of it. This. A woman on a balcony in the early morning, laughing, with the Han River silver below them and the city beginning to wake around them and everything that had been paid to arrive at this specific, ordinary, irreplaceable moment already paid. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him. The river moved below in the early light, the way rivers moved, continuously, without record of what had passed over them, full of the indifferent beauty of things that simply continued. They sat together as the city came awake. There was nothing else required. Everything had been said. Everything had been paid. Everything that had been taken had been rebuilt into something different and stronger and more honest than what it replaced. The way bones healed denser at the break. The way scar tissue held differently than the original but held. The morning came on. They stayed. Some people walk out of your life without a single word. And some people, no matter how much they lose, no matter how many years pass, cannot forget you, no matter how hard they try. That's not weakness. That's the only kind of strength that actually lasts.